Hello, everyone, to the Warrior Kings podcast. This name is temporary, subject to change maybe later. But in these podcasts, we're going to be covering stuff that covers mentality, masculinity, and marriage. And today, I have a very special guest. Her name is Lisa Pircher-Reid. She was an information scientist who moved her career working from big data and AI into a stay-at-home mom who is now trying to change the world for her kids. She's the founder of the podcast Know More, Do Better. She is writing a book series called Healthier, which is going to have a total of 13 books, 3 of which she has written already. Her interests include AI, tech, and all things growth across the board. In this interview, we're going to get into authentic self, mental health, internal values, and tips and tricks for raising your kids. So without further ado, let's get into it. In your podcast, one of the things I want to ask you about was you have the concept of authentic self. And I wanted you to expound on that and like what your definition and what that meant to you is, because I think for a lot of people, authentic self means different things. And then sometimes in my own personal context, like authentic self means being myself. But then I've also seen authentic self be a cop out for like not self-improving or being mean to, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm just authentically manipulative. It's like that's
a limited mindset being called authenticity.
Yes, yeah, and where I'm just
Yes,
like,
okay,
so
I can understand that.
so yeah, why don't you expound on that?
So for me, I think authenticity wasn't really something that I even thought about for a long time. And then when I started I had an emotional breakdown when I was 30 and I was pregnant and I was still working. And I started to dive down this path of like, I have to sort this stuff out. I didn't realize I had mental health stuff that needed sorting out. I didn't realize that like perfectionism wasn't just a trait. I didn't realize it was like a mental health issue that I had. And there were all these things that I was learning about myself. And one of them was that I wasn't comfortable being myself. I changed who I was based on who I was around. And I didn't feel confident to just be myself around many people at all. And so that idea of constantly having to change myself to suit other people and to people please and to try and be what I thought other people wanted me to be, rather than actually pausing and considering like, what are my values and what do I care about? And for me, becoming my authentic self has been about learning how to hold boundaries, learning to say no, learning to make decisions based on what I value and what I want, not what I think is expected of me, and not what I think I should be doing based on, like either what I grew up believing was what I was meant to be doing, or what I think society expects me to do as an upstanding citizen, all that sort of stuff. So for me, it was really about learning that it was okay to be me. And a part of it was also accepting, sitting with the fear of rejection. And understanding that it's okay for other people not to like me, and I don't have to change myself and be someone I'm not just so that other people will like me, because what's the point of them liking me if I don't get to be myself? Like, I never really sat down and thought about it. And then the more I learned about myself, the more I realized I didn't even really know myself or what I liked. I just knew who I had become, and that wasn't someone I wanted to be anymore.
Do you know what triggered you? Well, I mean, obviously it was the pregnancy, and then there was one day where you just had the epiphany, or was it?
I broke down in tears at work.
Oh, okay.
I think I was about 7 or 8 months pregnant, and like all of my projects were in the red, which is fine, right? I was a senior project manager. Like, my job is to solve that stuff. And actually, for me, tech issues are like, I love solving tech issues, but most of them were people issues, not tech issues. And I sort of had this point where I was a crippling perfectionist, right? I wanted to do everything perfectly. And for me at the time, I understand it now, I didn't then, because I didn't know how to hold boundaries. And because I was a perfectionist, those two things combined made it really difficult for me to know how to say no, or know where the end of my role was. So I thought if I needed to achieve something and somebody else had an issue, that I had to help them solve their issue because they were my roadblock, rather than just saying like, I have a roadblock. And so I kind of had this breakdown, thinking like I was just struggling with everything. And there was this one project that somebody described the project to me as if they felt like they were under those compressive
hydraulic presses.
Yes, he was like, it's like being under a hydraulic press. And I was like, yeah, that's how it feels. And I was 7 months pregnant, and I just burst into tears. Like, I want to prioritize my kid and be healthy, and this stress cannot be good for my baby. Like,
Yeah.
what am I even doing? And I just broke down crying.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, at the time, I had the most empathic manager I could have ever had, and she was amazing. And so I think I share the story in one of the podcast episodes anyway, but she just kind of went, you know what, just cancel your meetings. Don't even cancel your meetings. Just go home. Don't sign in for anything. Just
Yeah.
make a list of all the stuff you're struggling with, and then we'll deal with it on Monday. Like, just go home and
Mm-hmm.
like breathe, basically.
Yeah.
But yes, yeah, so I had this breakdown, and then it kind of, I had a kid, and then there was the sleep deprivation, and there was the complete lack of preparedness. And like, I'm a child of divorce, and I grew up with my dad, so like I didn't have a mum to go to ask questions, and I kind of,
Mm-hmm.
I was up at 2 a.m. like researching stuff
Yeah.
on Google, and like
Who knows
um
what that
yeah,
brings?
all sorts. And then so it kind of, that was the initial emotional breakdown, and I saw a therapist a few times then, and I started learning about perfectionism. And then I think my baby was about 6 months old. I had a falling out with family. It was Christmas, and like, it was all too much, and it all built up for me, and it just kind of all came out in this one um, messy falling out.
Mm-hmm.
And then it took me years to like rebuild, well, not years, months. It took me months to rebuild myself as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And that was right when COVID hit too. So it was
Kind
actually,
of,
it worked well for me, because
yeah,
I
perfect
had time
timing.
to just focus on my baby and myself. Yeah. And I completely changed trajectory of my life. We like picked up and left Sydney, left the career behind, left all that, moved from, a little 100-meter square apartment to a beautiful acreage, and like whole life changed, because I realized, yeah, it wasn't for me anymore.
Yeah, the little hustle, like it sounds like a lot to number one be pregnant, because I can't even imagine what that's like. I've just seen what my wife went through, but being pregnant with all the pressure, and then it sounds like there's family pressure on top of that too.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't family pressure per se. It was unhealthy behaviors that I didn't know were unhealthy,
Mm,
and unhealthy relationships that I didn't know were unhealthy. And like, one of the big things for me as well is I had stopped drinking,
mm,
and like, my family has a big drinking culture, and
okay.
so that had an impact as well, because my relationships were changing, because I was pregnant, because I was so busy at work, because I felt like I was drowning a little bit in parenthood, but I felt the need to like not be honest about that. So it was kind of like, oh yeah, the baby's sleeping. No, she slept like 2 hours in total a night. Like, I had nights where I just didn't sleep. And so you can imagine the hormonal impacts and the just
Yeah,
general mood impacts of, like, I was pretty severely sleep deprived for a total of about 3 to 4 years.
yeah,
But those first 6 months, I was sleeping maybe 2, maybe 3 hours a night. And then, because my husband was still working, and I was trying to, be grateful that I didn't have to go back to work and all that sort of stuff, I tried to hide it from everybody. No, I'm doing fine, but I was like really struggling inside.
mm.
Yeah.
So it sounds like almost before that point you had a hard time expressing feelings to maybe even
Yeah.
your husband.
Yeah. So my husband's really, really good at reading me. He always
Okay.
has been. So he would tell me, like, it looks like you're feeling this way. And I, no, like, a complete denial. Like, no, I'm not feeling that at all.
Mm,
Um,
that's quite interesting.
and yeah, he spent years like, he could pick things, like, I bite my nails when I feel anxious. I know that now, but
Mm,
he would spend he'd be like, what's wrong? I'm like, nothing's wrong. He's like, well, you're biting your nails. I'm like, I just bite my nails because I'm bored. He's like, no,
no.
you
Yeah.
bite your nails when you're feeling anxious. Like, what's going on? I'm like,
Mm.
no, I don't. Like, that happened for years. We've been together for 16 years. Like, we had those conversations for at least a decade.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think I grew up logical and analytical,
Mhm.
and it was emotions were
Under the table.
emotions were something that I avoided.
Mhm.
I think for a while I intentionally avoided them, and then there was a period where I'd been avoiding them for so long that I actually just didn't know how to feel them.
Yeah, I
I
can.
didn't know that they were there. I denied and repressed them for so long.
Mhm. I can kind of relate to that because I think like around the age I was 15 or 16, which is kind of weird to say because I'm a teenager. But there's a long time where I was like, I don't know. Like every day I felt dumb. I don't know if that's the same, but I felt like a lack of emotion and there was no up or down throughout the day. It was literally just flat every day for months on end. I don't know.
Uh,
I don't know if that's the same. Uh, I'm not
yeah,
sure if that's similar to you or if that was
I
just
think it
happened to me.
wasn't for me. It wasn't that I felt numb. I have had that feeling, but for me, most of the time is that I felt anxious and stressed almost all the
Mm,
time, that it was normal. So
okay.
to like, I didn't associate anxiety and stress. Like, people would ask me often, like, how do you deal in these high stress projects and things? Because I was actually in relatively high stress roles. But to me, I was like, no, I thrive in these situations because I didn't see it as stressful because my stress levels were so high anyway that it didn't feel any
Mm,
different to me. So I was comfortable
yeah,
in stress.
it makes sense. Okay, okay. There's when you're telling me about that, I wrote down like about two questions. One of them was just because I actually had trouble figuring out what a toxic relationship was growing up. It took me a long time. I didn't figure that out until I was like 25.
You
So I was
learned before
wondering.
me.
Oh, okay. But I mean, compared to everyone else, like it just seems like that's a long time to figure out like this is not a healthy behavior. And so I was wondering if you're if you wanted to give if you don't want to, that's fine. But if you want to give like one or two examples of like things that were like a toxic thing that was being done to you, maybe in the workplace or whatever, that obviously should not be happening. Just in case there's people in the audience
um,
who are like me at 16 who haven't figured it out yet.
so um, let me think. So toxic in terms of family when I was younger that I didn't realize was toxic was I had a family member who suffered from suicidal thoughts and some suicidal behaviors,
Mm,
and it was like this thing that we like she would tell me about, but I was sort of sworn to secrecy,
mm,
and I couldn't tell anyone about it,
yeah.
and um, everybody knew there was something, and it was like we just walked on eggshells and then kind of pretended that it wasn't happening or that it wasn't there. And so for me, like understanding that it's safe to talk about things,
Okay.
and I didn't really learn that as much until like so from a as a parent, we practice consent parenting, um, and so it wasn't until I really learned that like teaching my kids, hey, no matter what anyone tells you, it is always safe to tell mummy and daddy what's going on.
Yeah.
No matter if somebody tells you it's not safe or that something bad is going to happen, it is always safe. And in our family, we don't keep secrets.
Mm,
There can be surprises like birthday presents and that sort of thing, but we don't keep secrets. It's always safe to tell us something. Whereas when I grew up, a lot was unspoken, and I never asked because things weren't talked about. And
okay.
then like I kind of have had lived my life for a long time thinking that like you just don't talk about hard things, and that there's some things that you're just not allowed to talk about even though you know they're happening. um, and so that was a big realization for me, and I'm still learning that it's safe to talk about these things because like even now I can feel my hands starting to sweat like talking about you know
That past
that
past
sort of thing.
experience.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then in a workplace, a toxic situation is what was toxic for me particularly was when there is an expectation that people will deliver and deliver and deliver without a break, that they'll behave like robots, that it doesn't
Oh,
matter. Like you get that crunch of, well, we've told the customer we're going to do something, so you're going to have to figure out how to do it. So, for me, when I was still at uni, I started working already in fintech, and it was normal for me to like I thought 16-hour days were pretty regular when it was near a project. Like that was just part of, well, that's what happens when you work on a project. It's completely acceptable. But like, when do you get to hold your personal boundaries and be like, well, no, actually, like I need to go home, I need to sleep, I need to eat.
yeah, yeah.
um,
That's
and so, and I had some really great opportunities in my career, but looking back, there's a lot of times where if I knew how to hold healthy boundaries, I would have been a healthier person.
yeah. Okay. The that's interesting fintech because I would imagine probably fintech's also that's like a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Oh, it paid well.
Yeah.
I won't deny that
I
part.
remember I watched this video about this the guy who worked at Goldman Sachs and it's like 20-hour days were normal. That
Yeah,
is kind of
that's
nuts.
just what you do. And if you don't do that, we'll go home.
Then or go home and then we'll find someone else because some other eager young person's going to jump in here.
Exactly.
That's an interesting environment because luckily in my work life I haven't had that yet. I've had parts where it's close to that, but then that person, the person who was managing me, got let go. So I was like, okay, great, maybe I'll stay here a little longer. That yeah, for me it was. I read Ray Dalio's book about principles, and he goes into like how he makes all of his decisions and for his corporate structure, et cetera. And one of the things to manage was it's essentially almost like when you're in a manager position, you're almost like a coach. Like you have to let your players rest and then put them in when they're supposed to perform, but then you can't just have them perform all the time. People need to
You
rest.
need breaks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think when you're in big programs, when budget starts to get spent faster than they think it was going to get spent and
Mm,
deliverables aren't happening on time, they crunch the people. And I worked on some amazing stuff and I really enjoyed a lot of my career, but I look back at it and go, yeah, there are other ways to do that.
yeah, definitely. From those low points, what would you say are the biggest takeaways or lessons that you think you've walked away with from that?
um,
Holding healthy boundaries was.
yeah, holding healthy boundaries. Um, One of the things that, like, if I went back into the corporate world now, that would really benefit me is like knowing how to speak to people in an assertive way, because I used to be very passive aggressive. Um,
Okay.
and so it's kind of aligned with the whole healthy boundaries and saying no and that, but being able to speak in a way that is respectful and gets your point across and is clear on what is or isn't acceptable. Um, I kind of, I don't know, I just agreed to everything in my career because I thought I had such great opportunities and I didn't want to miss out on them.
Mm. Like almost like it sounds like people pleasing, right? Just saying yes to everyone, and then
Yeah.
you everyone adds their work to you, and then you're stuck trying to do all of it.
Yeah. And then I would go out every Friday and Saturday night and get hammered. And that was my way of dealing with it, which is also entirely unhealthy. But for me, that was like, it was almost like a badge of honor, like how much I drank, because that's just the culture that I grew up in.
Oh, interesting. Okay, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So like growing up, like alcohol was just a part of life. And then it got to a point where um had a bad day at work, have a beer. Like that's just how you deal with it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I was pretty unhealthy for a long time.
Mm. Wow. How long were you, and then how long again were you in in that kind of a culture or environment for like let's say you had a beer for fintech? Was that
Oh, a decade.
10 years? Wow.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff to unlearn, I guess, also
A
in a
lot of
way.
what, sorry?
I was like, so it's like a lot of habits that because I understand your stage now, your personal development. So it's a lot of stuff that almost like you have to rewire in your mind, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of stuff. And I mean, I've been on my journey towards my authentic self for
Hmm.
4.5, 5 years now.
Okay.
And there's still a lot that I learn. And it's kind of like you learn one thing and you start getting better at that, and then you find all this other stuff that you're like, oh, I got to work on that now too. Great,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
That I was getting really healthy here. Now I discovered that new thing that I didn't know I was doing. Awesome.
Hmm. Well, all of it will compound, right? Like you just learn skills here, and then those add to your other skills, and you don't have to worry about this one as much. So
Yes,
it's
yes.
all an upward trajectory, which is good. Um, so now that you're on your way to your authentic self, and then you've had to rebuild yourself, what would you say your internal values are now? Like now that you're in this stage of progress, and or where do you want to attain to get those values?
So for me, my core values now are like family, love, and compassion.
Okay.
So me, my husband, my kids, the four of us were my priority. And then health. So obviously improving health
In
across
all
all
of those
areas, in all of
yep,
those
okay.
areas. And for me, like my, I love learning. So and information, which sounds kind of nerdy, but like the acquisition of and dissemination of information is like my passion. It's my drive. But yeah, and then doing that in a way that improves how I show up for myself and for my kids and for my husband, and then how I can help others on that journey too.
Really well said. And that's a, I don't know, the adjective is escaping me, but I guess, lack of a better word, that's a very beautiful life goal. For lack of a better word. That's really good. On your way to this authentic self, what would you say is the biggest unhealthy belief you've had to let go, especially from your past and from all the stuff you're essentially, it sounds like you're rewiring, right? So what's the biggest unhealthy belief you've had to let go?
That I was unlovable.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Do you know where that I guess where the inception of that idea first came from?
I think so. So my parents got divorced when I was like 8. And like at the time it was very much oh, your mother isn't a healthy person, so like this is a good thing. And I was in the household, I was living with her. I knew that it was healthier for us not to continue living in that environment. But from that, I think the she's not healthy and this is better for you kind of, that was just, oh, okay, that's the reality. So however I felt about it, like, and again, I said, we don't talk about big things in my family. So it was kind of like my parents got divorced and then it was kind of like, okay, life goes on type thing. Okay. And so I didn't realize until in my 30s that actually I struggled from like internalizing, well, like how can a mother not have contact with her daughter or her child? And then when I became a mother, it was just like wow, I would do anything for these kids. Yeah. How could a mother not even have contact? So yeah, it was quite interesting actually, because after I had my emotional breakdown, just say it like it's an everyday thing. After I had it, I went to the doctor and they recommended I see a psychologist. And I was like, no, because I'd grown up around the ideas of suicide. So I was like, no, I'm healthy. Like I don't need a psychologist.
Yeah. Only that person who's talking about it needs one.
Right. Which is also an unhealthy view. Pretty much everyone could benefit from psychological help. Yeah. But so I went anyway, and then I really got along with my psychologist. It was quite funny. She gave me some homework in my first session, and by the second session, I had done 3 times the amount. And she was like, "Wow, people usually take like 10 sessions to get this far." And I was like, "You're treating me for perfectionism. What did you expect?" Like, of course, I went above and beyond because
isn't your job to listen?
What you're treating me for? Yeah. I forgot the question was.
What was the biggest unhealthy belief you had to let go, and then where was the inception?
Being unlovable. Yeah. So I remember being on the phone with her after having a falling out with my family, and she told me to write down on a piece of paper, "I am unlovable," and to cross it out. And I wrote, "I am," and I was like, "I'm not going to write that. I don't believe that. Why would I write that down?" And I didn't say that out loud, but that's what I thought. And I stopped and I just held my pen there for a while, and she continued talking. And after the session, I was just like, this idea sat with me, and I was like, why did she choose to say that? Because she didn't usually say things unless it was on point directly about me. And I was like, why would she have picked I'm unlovable? And then like the more I thought about it, the more I realized like, oh, this perfectionism is this fear of failure, which I really struggled from. All of it came from, I don't want to be rejected by anybody. I don't want to make a mistake so that I'm alone and it's scary. And I don't, I had this like really strong bond with my dad. And I was always told it was this like special bond. And then, later I realized, I actually I had a fear of losing him. So I just turned myself into whatever I thought he wanted me to be. So I was easygoing. Easygoing means shutting off your emotions. And like I was everything that I thought I was meant to be. And that was part of the learning to be my authentic self, was actually learning to be me, whether my dad liked it or not.
Yeah. Well, that's really heavy. I'm not gonna.
Yeah. That's a big question.
Yeah, that is a big question. How are you doing with it now, I guess, is the follow-up question to
Um,
that.
Good. It took me a long time to figure out what self-love is and how to show self-love and how to practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned from my husband and my kids by the way I show up for them and the way they show up. Well, the way my husband shows up for me and the way I show up for my kids. I learned in that process of what do I want to model for my children
Mm-hmm.
and how do I want them to see themselves, and I want them to grow up loving themselves and entirely 100% comfortable being themselves no matter what situation they're in, and to make choices that are aligned to what they truly want in life, not what they think is expected of them or anything like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I love myself now. It
Yeah.
sounds weird to say out loud in this kind of context, but yeah, I've learned self-love, and a large part of that is learning how to practice self-compassion and non-judgment.
Mm-hmm. And I think going along with the way you're presenting yourself for your husband, or the way your husband presents himself to you, and the way you present yourself for the kids, also is probably built in the you want to instill in them. At least to me, maybe the assumption is wrong, but it seems like you want to also instill in them, like, no matter which way they decide to go, like, you won't break contact. Is kind of the big one.
Yeah, for me, I tell my kids it takes a long time for me to say I love you to my kids, because I say I love you no matter what you say, no matter what you do, no matter how you feel. I will love you forever and always unconditionally,
Mm,
because I want them to know all of those things. Like, it literally doesn't matter any of those things. I will still love you unconditionally, and I will be here for you, and I will keep showing up for you.
mm. I think that's wonderful to say, especially so.
It's long. They don't fall asleep when I say it either, even though it takes me ages.
I say some similar stuff to my daughters, like, "Mom and Dad love you very much. You're very we appreciate you." Or what is it? "Mom and Dad love you very much. You're very special to us, and we're very happy you're in our family." Like, I think
Yeah,
those are the kind of the three.
I appreciate you. Because, like, were you ever told that you were appreciated as just you, not because you achieved anything, just you as a person were appreciated as a kid? Were you ever told
Oh,
that?
as a kid, that one I'm not sure, but to be fair, my memory as a kid is very, like, scattered. So it could be possible my parents did and just didn't register with me at all. But I don't know if that one, if I ever got that one.
Yeah, just like, I'm proud of you. Like, it doesn't matter what you do.
I've gotten I'm proud of you, but it was after I won nationals, so that was a little bit
Dependent on
different.
behavior. I love you when you win nationals.
My dad told me later, though, like, so just as a backup for my dad, it was he did tell me later that he was always proud of it, proud of us as kid, like, for his kids, because we were, at the end of the day, we were raised well with good character, and that was for him the bigger part, than us winning nationals. Even though when I did win nationals, he, like, cried because he was super happy. I was like, yes.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that's the biggest unhealthy belief you had to let go, and it looks like you're going over it well now, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things you talk about in the podcast episode I listened to was you're trying to have as many best days as possible. And so I was wondering what your definition of a best day is, because we're both analytics, and analytics like metrics. So
Yeah, it took me ages, because I think that's the first episode, and I like listed off this big long list, and then later when I listened to it, because it's weird recording a podcast about personal growth when you're on the journey yourself, because you go
oh yeah.
back to listen to an old episode and you're like, oh, my opinion has changed already. Um,
Uh,
but like, I think in that episode I like listed all these things that I needed, and I was like, man, if that's the whole list, like, that's really hard to have your best day every day. And I have my best day of my life like very often. And I think for me now, my definition is about um, showing up and practicing the skills and the traits and behaviors aligned to my ideal self. So that doesn't mean that I have to get it right. It doesn't mean that I have to do everything I want to achieve in a day. It doesn't mean that I have to be perfect. It just means that I have to be practicing and trying. And part of that is, if I make a mistake, part of the practice is practicing self-compassion and self like acceptance and all that sort of stuff. And
mm,
part of it is just um, growing every day. Like, I'm sure you're the same. Like, have you
yeah.
grown more from your kids than like any other stage of your life?
Kids. I'm not sure if it's directly from my kids, but what my kids have done, just because I do like spending time with them, but because I have to spend time with them, there's less time to do other things, and so I've gotten really efficient with the remaining amount of free time. So when I look at people who are single, I'm just like, you guys don't understand. Like,
Yeah, you have no idea how much time you have.
yeah,
Use it.
they're like, oh, I'm so busy. Like, you don't. don't
It's like,
don't tell me about busy.
yeah, well, I'm really busy and I'm really tired.
Yeah,
Those two things now. If people don't have kids, I'm like, yeah, I used to think that too.
yeah.
And now, like, now if I have an hour, I can be so productive in
Mhm.
1 hour.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
lot of time.
yeah, like I used to watch Netflix. Like, who has time for that anymore?
Exactly, 100%.
um, uh, yeah, so it's about showing up and practicing all of the things that are aligned with my ideal self, and a lot of that is since having kids and since working on my emotional health is practicing self-regulation and patience and compassion
Okay.
and empathy, and those skills, the more you practice them, the better you get at them, and the better I get at them, like my entire life gets better.
Hmm. Okay. Just curious, when you're visualizing your ideal self, do you have an ideal self of you in the future, or like what is ideal self to you?
Oh, that's a good question. um I
I think I have a similar program, but I'm wondering if your program is the same as the one I'm running.
I love the way you describe that.
Yeah.
um so for me it's not like a visual visualization. For me it's more about how do I want to show up. So, like when you've slept well and you're having a good day and your kid has an issue with something
Mm,
and they have big feelings about it, and you show up in a way that is compassionate, and there's like endless compassion there, and you get down on their level and you're everything that they need you to be in that moment.
mm,
It's knowing that in those hard moments how I want to show up, and not necessarily just with my kids, but in general, for me, my ideal self is knowing how I want to show up in hard moments, and then practicing being that person in those hard moments, not just when it's easy to do so.
mm. I'm just curious. Do you do visualizations, or have you thought about it, or?
I thought about it after you mentioned around you like actually do visualizations of fights and things.
Mhm.
Um, I don't. If I think through things. For me, it's almost like I don't know how to describe it. Like
Is it more
I
of like an
prefer
auditory word when you're like someone's talking to you as you're thinking versus like you're actually saying something happening in front of you? Like if you were to imagine something, I guess, is that?
uh, when I imagine things, it's like logical uh, patterns and thoughts. They're not visual. I
Mm,
don't think visually very often.
okay. Are you?
For me, it's
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know how to describe it. Maybe it's auditory.
Maybe.
I have a running monologue in my head.
Mm,
I used to think that was entirely normal. I thought everybody had the inner monologue, but apparently not. Apparently that's I think that's a neurodivergence. Maybe I don't know. But I like it's a conversation with myself, I guess.
mm, okay. I was well, then what I do is I guess different than what you do because I'm I
How
think of the three ways there's supposed to be like three different ways of learning, like visual, kinesthetic, and auditory. I think.
then I must be auditory.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like you're auditory versus like I'm very visual and kinesthetic.
Yeah, I got that impression. That's why visualizations to me, I understand the power of them, and their auditorizations. Is that a
Mm.
word? They're auditory
I'm
for
sure,
me.
but we can make up words.
It,
I don't
it's a spoken thing.
Yeah.
It's a. I feel like it sound weird saying it's more like a voice in my head than an image that I see. It's a
Mm.
conversation.
I'm kind of curious. Well, I know I'm kind of curious just because you're on a different learning pathway. I know this is like we did a hard right.
Yeah, when you were like, "What should we name the episode?" I was like, "Yeah, it's a conversation's not going to go the way you think
Yeah,
it is,"
yeah.
because very rarely do my conversations ever go the way people think they're going to go.
uh, yeah. Well, that's a good point. What I was thinking about was like when you're because I'm curious now. Like, let's say you're going to you were gonna go to the grocery store to buy stuff, and you're thinking about what to expect to buy over there? Is it just a voice in your head telling you what you need to buy, but there's no visualization that happens of you being at the store picking things out?
Oh yeah, there's no visualization there. It's I'll visualize okay, if I'm like writing a shopping list,
Mm,
which at the moment we draw our shopping list so that it's legible to a 2 and a 4 year old.
okay.
I'm the only person at the supermarket with like my actual pictures of bananas instead of bananas. But they love it.
That's awesome.
It's made shopping a lot easier. For a trick for you, like there was a period where they would, like when they've moved from wanting to sit in the shopping trolley the whole time and they want to walk around, they would just
Mm,
grab everything, and it drove me nuts because I don't want to say no all the time, and my home is a yes space, and I didn't want to make the supermarket a no space. I want it to be an
okay.
enjoyable family activity. So I started drawing our shopping list, and so like my kids like get really excited and they go and grab the thing that I actually need, not just picking random stuff off the shelves. And it also helps with the like impulse buy because I'm like, oh, sorry, you didn't put it on the shopping list. We're only getting things on the shopping
Oh,
list.
yeah, that's a good tool. I'll take that one.
Yeah, works really well. Now I
Um,
forgot what your question was. Oh yeah, so like if I'm visualizing, if I need to think of that, I'll picture the fridge and be like, was there still tomatoes in the drawer? Like I'll picture that side of things. But it'll more be like a checklist in my head of what are the things that we eat every week. Okay, we need this, 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 and this. And I'll often, if we haven't used it in the previous week, I'll buy it again because I forget to check the fridge, and I don't always do the visualization part of it.
mm, okay.
So yeah, for me, I'm like a checklisty kind of person.
Okay. Um, I was hoping that was going to give a little bit more insight into the next question. The next question I was going to ask
What's the
was
next
like,
question?
let's say, so for your ideal self, there's a certain way you want to show up, right? And there's a certain, I'm assuming there's a certain way you want to speak to your kids, especially in that one where, because you were describing your ideal self as where you wake up when you're well rested, and your kids having big emotions. I'm assuming you want to speak to them a certain way, right? So like,
Yeah.
how does how would you be able to tell yourself, because that's in your mind, but like how does that work out? How do you imagine that going? Do you think about that
Oh,
visualize, or is that like auditory and someone's telling you you're well rested, and then just because
uh,
I'm like curious about
no.
this method, this
This method that I can't describe, I just know what I do. And now I'm going to go away and have to look into this sort of stuff about different thinking styles. Because you caught me the other day when you said about how Bill Gates thinks. I was like, oh, I don't know how people think. Now I have to go down that rabbit hole. Thank you.
I'm a little bit like I'm a little well I'm studying NLP, which is essentially how
Neurolinguistic
to
programming.
yeah, um
Ah,
which
I
is
studied that
also
years ago.
there's a new stuff now. I touched on it for a second. Like I read like half a book, and then now I'm like really into it because I want to be able to help men however they're thinking and whichever way they're thinking. So
Interesting. Because I remember learning that sort of stuff when I did business analysis. Um,
business analysis.
yeah, I was a business analyst
Yeah,
when
yeah,
at the
but
beginning
like
of my career.
how does that tie?
Oh,
But
because
that's what that's what I was curious.
because the way people think, so like if you're trying to elicit requirements for someone about a system, for example, often people try and tell you the solution that they want rather than telling you the requirements, or they'll give you requirements of a system that they've already considered in their heads. So you have to learn how to elicit information from someone.
I see. I see.
It used to be called like gathering business requirements, but it's not. It's eliciting information from someone.
Okay.
And part of it is learning to speak their language. So like
Mm,
I don't even remember it now, but like the way they look can tell you
yes.
how they recall information, and then
Yes.
the words that they use. So yeah, I was feeling this. Okay, there's somebody who feels things, or oh, I heard this, or I hear what you're saying. They're
Yeah.
an auditory person.
Mm-hmm.
Like I often say, I hear you,
Mm. Well, it
and
makes
I'm
sense because
working
you're
auditory, but
yeah.
I'm working on like incorporating more of them for my kids. I can see you're having a hard time. I can hear what's going on, that sort of thing.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I got to get back into NLP actually, because it's probably very
Just
helpful in the
I'm giving you
personal
more
growth
to
side of
do
stuff.
lists over here.
Yeah, I know. Just adding to my stuff I need to learn. And now I forgot what we were talking about.
How would you how do you imagine yourself in the
Oh,
perfect day so that way you know how to act now in the present?
um, it's checklisty again. I think it's a checklist because it'll be
Mm.
like, yeah, okay, I'll give you an example that's complete side thing, but I
Sure.
suffer from allergies, like anaphylaxis level, right? And when I would go into anaphylaxis, my husband would become emotional. and I would become very logical and analytical, and here's my checklist. Okay. So he would, be feeling big feelings about like stress about the fact that like I could stop breathing and die type thing. Whereas for me, that wasn't it wasn't something I felt. It was okay, I can tell them having an allergic reaction. Is the itching in my ears started yet? Has my tongue started swelling? Are my hands feeling itchy? Is it itchy? Like I would be listing off where is the itchiness, because I knew like if the inside of my ears started to feel like cauliflower and was itchy, I knew it was a bad reaction. And so then I'd be like, okay, well, if I've got that feeling, then I need to check my hands and my feet, because my hands and my feet are really itchy and I've got the cauliflower ears. Like I need to be in hospital soon, and I need to get the EpiPen out. Like, and so for me, it's these checklists of if that, then something else.
Okay.
And so when my taking that thinking style back to like when my kids having a hard time, it's sort of checking in with myself. So it's depending on how I react. And now it's noticing how I've reacted. Have I reacted or have I responded is the first thing. And then, because that's a big difference. And then is my reaction or my response based on how I'm feeling, or am I actually showing up for them for what they need from me? And so then it becomes a checklist again of like, okay, why are they feeling this way? Oh, I can see that this is what's happening. I might know that they're feeling that way because they're hungry or angry or tired or, whatever else, that checklist too. But then it's, okay, what just happened that they're feeling this way, and how do I respond next? And it's almost like decision trees as well of, okay, I need to validate first child, but second child also needs validation. And so how do I listen to her story without telling her I'm prioritizing this one? So I'll like consciously hug one child while listening to the other child, and then I'll switch and I'll make sure I've got a hand on both of them. And for me, it's very much it's lists. It's often lists of there's these 5 things that I want to happen in parallel. Am I doing all of them in parallel?
That's really interesting. Because during stressful situations, generally that's how I operate. I guess I switch back into auditory apparently, because I have the same mental framework where it's like if whatever, like let's
if
say
this then that, and
that's a majority of my days. That's how I think. If this then that, like case when, then
programming languages.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I'm not actually a very good programmer. My husband is, but I'm more of the I like how a system works and how
it integrates with
I like
everything.
data. I like big data, but and information that you can gather from data. But yeah, programming, I'm not great at it. Because just a side note, like it bothers me that I can put all this effort in and there's a comma missing or like a semicolon or something, and the whole thing like that was my bugbear in uni, and I don't think I ever got past that. And my husband's like, you can code though, like I can pseudocode and I can have a conversation with somebody and understand the logic of code, but I don't sit down and physically code anything just because it's just not my thing.
Understood. Makes sense. Okay. Well, I was going to offer a way, well, I guess a method I guess I do. I don't know if you're able to put this into an auditory framework for you to use. But for visualization, part of the reason I picked up on it was because if you do more reps, your mind can't really tell the difference between if it's really happening and if it's not. So if you were to like close your eyes and imagine biting a lemon and imagine all of the lemon juice is like going over your tongue and your gums, whatever, you probably salivated a little bit.
Because I did when you said that.
Because your mind can't tell the difference. And so
yep.
For fighting, what I would do is I would visualize fights happening. I'd visualize scenarios repeatedly. So that way I'm getting extra reps and I'm conditioning my eyes to see and my body to still feel the same way. But now what I'm doing, because I'm a parent and I have other priorities, is like I'm slowly learning that if I do this for let's say I'm coming home and I'm feeling very stressed, and I can imagine that in my head and then replay it and then taking a deep breath when I get home. So that way I'm more relaxed for my kids. And so doing that repeatedly helps train the neural pathway.
Oh, that's really interesting. Huberman, do you listen to the Huberman?
Occasionally. I don't have there's a lot of podcasts with a lot of good information, so I'm trying to like pick what I can, because we only got that 1 hour.
That's people who are like, I'm bored. I'm like, there's so many things you could learn if you were bored. Well, my kids have only recently learned the idea of I'm bored, and like they don't like my response, because my response is like, oh, that's amazing, that's so good for your imagination. They're like,
it's not the response.
I don't want to use my imagination, Mom. I'm like, it's really good for you, trust me. And then I'll like, if they're in the right mood and like receptive to receiving information, I'll start explaining to them why it's really important for them to feel bored.
Mm.
But yeah, Huberman talks about uh, the visualization techniques and the stuff you're talking about.
Yeah.
For me, I tend to learn better from practice. And because I'm a stay-at-home mom and because I spend so much time with my kids, like the things that are my highest priorities, I like just practice them.
Yeah. There's a lot of reps in your day already. So
A lot, a
I bet.
lot of reps in my day.
Well, excellent. Um, trying to bring us back to the main road.
Yeah, sorry.
One of the things I listened to, because you'd sent me the video uh, about for 10 minutes about personal growth and the language you use in your mind. Do
Conscious
you want to,
language.
yeah, conscious language. Do you want to expand on that a little bit more? Tell me more about how you
Yeah.
got into it and what that means for you.
Yeah. So it was interesting. I I asked before coming on this, I asked my husband, I was like, what are the things that we've worked on that you think have made the biggest difference in our marriage?
Mm.
So we've been together, for context, we've been together for 16 years now.
Okay.
And we've both been on this journey of self-growth for the last 5 years, right? So we had a lot of unhealthy patterns in the past. We had the same conversations in the past, we had the same fights in the past, all that sort of thing.
Mm.
And I was like, what is it that we've worked on that's made the biggest difference, you think? And he was like, oh, it's definitely the conscious language, because it knowing how to speak to another person where you take responsibility for and ownership of your own feelings makes a big difference. And because I used to be passive aggressive and because I used to think, so when I was younger, there were many situations where it was like it was my fault that somebody else felt that way.
I used to go through that, but
yeah, right. So you take on this ownership, but what I didn't realize for a long time was that that becomes a two-way street. So you think that other people are responsible for how you feel.
Oh, I
If
didn't
that's how
get
you
to that. I didn't get to that point, but I did feel that.
You were responsible for how other people felt.
Yes, I had. Anyway, continue.
I want to know more, but we can continue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was both of us learning to speak to each other in a way that was removing blame, shame, and guilt, and that just focused on like how we were feeling. And it was actually quite funny because we had a transition, right, where we both started learning. Okay, we learned about the 4 horsemen and the triangle of drama, and so avoid being defensive and contempt, and I wrote down the 4 horsemen because I can only remember defensive and criticism, but there's stonewalling and what's the other one? Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Okay.
And we realized all those things had shown up in our relationship. So we started learning how to be more conscious in our language. That was like, instead of, oh, you're doing this, it was, when you do this or when this happens, I feel a particular way. I feel angry when you say this, or I felt upset when this happened. And so we both started working on it. And I remember we went for a walk, and we were both really sleep deprived and we were having a really hard time. And we both just started this language journey. And the conversation was like, I felt really angry when you did this. And then the other person was like, yo, I felt angry when you did this. And I felt angry when you did this. And so we had like learned a piece of it, but not the whole thing. And so like our conversations were getting healthier, and we were both trying so hard, but we didn't know, like we hadn't yet learned about it's okay to pause a conversation and come back when you're self-regulated. And we hadn't quite learned the importance of emotional regulation in the conscious language journey. So like over time, I think the biggest shift was that conscious language, and then understanding how to speak in a way that you're a team and there's a problem to be solved, not you're against each other. Like that language can create the ability for you to see a problem and solve it together as a team rather than see each other as the problem. And so when you speak, if you speak in a way that criticizes the other person and makes them feel like the problem, you're going to end up in the triangle of drama where you're either the victim, the persecutor, or the rescuer. And so when you learn to speak in a way that is clear that there is a problem, or that there is a feeling that you need addressed, or a boundary has been pushed, or something like that, but when you learn how to speak in a way that's like, there's a problem there, can we talk about it, rather than I don't like what you're doing, or you are a problem.
So I had a couple questions. One is the language, because this is something I hear a lot also. It's like where it's you two against the problem. It's like it has to be you two against the problem. How do you structure your language and tonality and maybe even body language in such a way where you can get both of you on the same page against the problem versus like I am just against you. Does that make sense? Because I mean,
Yes.
a lot of people go into it and it's just like, that's great. I would like to do that, for example, but like, how would
But
someone
how?
actually implement that into their
Oh, so
relationship?
the actual language, so shifting away from blame and shame has been a hard one for me, but using that language of uh uh I'm feeling sad.
Okay, so more focus on
Uh
like your internal feeling.
yeah, so I'm
Okay.
feeling this way. And then I think when you already started that journey, if both of you are on the journey, it can be a little bit easier as well, because you both understand that there's probably a trigger from your childhood that hasn't been unlearned, or that there's a unhealthy pattern from your childhood that you still aren't aware of, and you're trying to figure out what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So like my husband and I are learning that we both have different emotional triggers when it comes to cleaning, for example.
Mm.
So like when I was younger, I was criticized heavily about like my cleaning was never good enough. You know, I got Austrian parents, you know, you got to do things a certain way.
Yeah.
They were a lot more relaxed by the time I came around. I'm the fourth kid, but still, like I received a lot of criticism. And so my husband making any kind of comment around anything happening in the house, I took it as it was my
It's a very
responsibility and that he
personal.
was criticizing me.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I realized that that's my perception. Him complaining that there's something sticky on the floor, because we've got kids, there's like sticky stuff on the floor.
Yeah.
Like him complaining about that is a trigger, used to be a trigger for me. And like having an open conversation about when you said that, I felt defensive, like recognizing I felt defensive, but not just recognizing it for myself, like actually letting him know, like, oh, one of the four horsemen came up for me, so I must have been emotionally triggered. And then we'll actually talk about, instead of the fact that the floor is sticky, we'll go back a step and be like, oh, that's interesting. What about that triggered? Was it because I said it in a way that you felt blamed, or was it because you had an emotional trigger? And then we'll kind of break it down and go, oh, okay, he had no intention of saying that so that I would clean it, or that it was my fault that it was sticky.
Observation.
He was just feeling frustrated because he stepped in something, and like now he's got to go change his socks, right?
Mm.
And then one of the things for me was complaining. I used to complain and a lot, and I didn't realize how draining it was. And then when I spend time around people who complain a lot now, I can literally feel it eating at
Yeah.
my energy.
Big time.
And so yeah, it's really hard because I used to complain so much and it was so normal. And then now if I spend time with people complaining, it's like you can feel it drain from your body.
Yeah.
Like I
have like time
can,
limits.
yeah, I have space limits.
Well, if I'm there already, that's like, all right, cool. Well, the timer has started, so gotta
Yeah.
get out of here.
Yeah, I know I just got here, but it turns out I've got plans.
We totally forgot nap time.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it has been focusing on like what is the actual issue, and also identifying the issue behind the issue.
Mm.
So it's not that the floor is sticky, or it's not that you know, for my kids, and you're probably roughly around this age for them, it's not that the cup was the wrong color. It's that they felt frustrated that what they really wanted they didn't get. Yeah, so it's not like the cup is the wrong color. It's like there's a lack of feeling of power for our kids, and how do we give that power back to them? And you know, when you're having a conversation with your partner, it's like it's not this particular problem that's the root cause. So what's really the root cause there, and is there something that one of us or both of us need to work on, or something that we can change? And yeah, I think it's really hard to have those conversations when you are coming from an emotionally dysregulated position. And I spent a lot of time emotionally dysregulated without knowing.
Yeah, that would make it difficult for sure.
Yeah.
I've had a similar journey, but mine started a while ago. I think probably around 2016. So however long that's been. But I think the book I mentioned before, the Four Agreements, I think was the first part where I stepped into it, and I was like, oh, if I get upset about something, there's something in my world that's not. It's probably.
Yeah, you know, one of the best analogies I've heard about it is you're at a park and there's a dog running towards you. And if you're somebody who has been attacked by a dog in the past,
Oh,
or
it's scary.
has a view that dogs are aggressive, it can be really scary. If you have a
Yeah.
dog at home and it happens to be the same breed, like you might feel really excited. And if you're somebody who's a cat person, you might be like, a dog.
Mm,
Like the scenario hasn't changed. There's still a dog in a park running towards you, but
mm,
your perception makes a big difference. And I think up until my 30s, I didn't really understand that my perception was different. And I think I might have had a view that my perception was superior without even realizing it.
mm.
Because I grew up like being told I was the smart one. So I figured like what
You
I
were
thought was
superior.
right,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is unhealthy labeling.
You mean the being smart part or like the superior view part or both?
Both.
Oh, fair enough.
Both unhealthy.
Yeah.
I've, since having kids, I've understood how unhealthy labeling can be.
Have you heard the Huberman podcast on labeling intelligence versus effort praise?
I've seen snippets of that one. It aligns a lot with Carol Dweck's work around
He
growth
quotes,
mindset versus.
yeah, he quotes them a lot. So it's essentially that.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
the.
oh, go ahead.
No, continue.
I was gonna say I was lucky that my dad praised me a lot on effort when I was growing up, more so than like you're really intelligent, because essentially I listened to the whole podcast. I was like at two times speed, but it's essentially the if you label intelligence like you're smart, then your kid might cheat or take an easier test to maintain being smart. But if you praise effort or like it's really good you take this challenge, then they're always going to seek greater challenge.
Yes, and so two things come to mind from that. One, for me, because I assumed I was smart, I thought I didn't have to work as hard
Mm,
when it came to academic things. So
interesting
like,
byproduct.
yeah, so I just kind of. I'll give you an example. So in Australia, you do your HSC. Well, actually, I don't even think it's called that anymore, but you do, tests at the end of high school to get into university if you're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
university.
US has
Um,
something similar.
yeah. Um, I don't even know what they're called anymore, some acronym.
Yeah.
But I remember towards the beginning of the year, if you wanted, you could go and find out what they predicted your score to be for what you were going to get into uni. And I did that and they told me, and it was really high. So I stopped trying because I was like, oh, cool. Well, like I wasn't working hard to get that. So like I don't have to work hard. And then I got like 10 points lower than that because like I still studied and things, but I didn't work as hard because I just thought, oh, well, that's fine. I'm going to get that without trying.
Mm.
Um, and then so yeah, I think if I had understood that, um, if I had have understood that smartness isn't just this inherent thing that you naturally are good at everything, you still have to practice, you still have to work hard. And yeah, it impacted me in ways that I didn't really realize for a long time.
Mm.
And I didn't appreciate, like I have always been a hard worker, but I didn't do the work in the right places for a long time because
Because
I
you
didn't
assumed they
think
were
I
there
had
already.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
That's an interesting. I would not have because well, I grew up on the other side of things, so I didn't know that not working as hard would have also been a byproduct of praising smartness. That's kind of an interesting thing to hear from first person.
Yeah, because people talk about the
So dodging
yeah,
the bigger test part.
yes, and the expectations of perfectionism, all that comes with it as well. But for me,
Mm.
there was also that there was just this expectation that I should get something, I should understand. And so I often would really struggle internally when something didn't make sense straight away. When I wouldn't get something straight away. Like for me, I love IT, right?
Yeah.
Printers are like the bane of my existence sometimes. I don't know why. Just printers used to just not work for me. And
Mm.
they're so straightforward compared to like the tech stuff that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
And so I could melt down in tears because a printer wasn't working because I felt so frustrated that I couldn't get it. Like what it's a printer. How can it not print? And how can I not know how to print it? And it became like this internal self-criticism of like, there must be something wrong with me. Like, how can I not get this? I should be able to get this.
Yeah.
So yeah, it led to a lot of internal criticism because of the expectation of myself. I'm the smart one, I must get things. And so if I didn't get things straight away, I became really self-critical and like the inner critic became very loud.
Mm. That is pretty interesting. What are your thoughts on using the thoughts, for example, like I should be able to do this, or let's say for example someone's handing you a project, but you have this you have the language like I should be able to handle that. Like, what do you think about that as motivation on the onset of a project? Like, do you think that's good, or what would be if you don't want to use the language, how would you attack
So
that
for
project
me,
with confidence? I guess.
I am trying to drop the word should and all of the internal shoulds and musts that I have. And I've
I was
really
going to ask
embraced
you
the
about
word
that next.
can and practice. I
Okay,
can and I am practicing.
I
So for
can
me,
practice.
it's yeah, it's like I can do this, I can practice this, I can master this. And
Mm,
a big part of it has actually been embracing sucking and like being really bad at something.
mm,
Because for me, it was like, I tried to learn piano years ago and like it didn't go all that well because I wanted to play like Tchaikovsky when I was a beginner.
okay.
Like,
Yeah.
and then I would play and it sounded terrible because when you start learning to
You,
play piano, it sounds
yeah.
terrible, right? I
Yeah.
don't have the muscle memory and I didn't visualize or anything. Um, Whereas now I've started learning drums and I really enjoy it because I can see progress a lot faster. It's a lot easier because you can just like learn one drum beat and repeat it and it's not very good. And then you repeat it a bit more and you get better. And then the next time you come back, it feels more natural. So
Mm,
like the progression was a lot easier for me than learning piano. And because I had no expectations that I could drum, it was easier for me. Whereas with piano, I was like, yeah, I'll be able to play piano. And then I wasn't Tchaikovsky and like
yeah.
I would just
You'd
not
be
practice
frustrated.
because I didn't want anyone to hear how bad I was either. Like I felt I had to hide the fact I wasn't very good, which is hilarious because my husband, as a musician, will practice happily for hours and hours and hours, and he totally gets it. So he'll happily have me practice, and he totally understands that. But I often used to feel that need to like hide my practice from people because I didn't want to let people know that I wasn't very good at something, and I didn't want to let people know I was working on something until I knew I was good enough that I was comfortable to show them because of the whole fear of rejection and unlovable
Yeah.
thing. But it led back into that a lot.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so instead of saying you should, so let's say right now you're going to get a project though. So what would be the internal language if someone's handing you a big project? It's like I can do this is a better
Yeah,
phrase
I
than I
can do
should.
this.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think also the flexibility around like not expecting that things will just work out.
Ah, yeah. Okay. Like because if you expect it to go perfectly and it doesn't, then all of a sudden everything's chaos. Versus if you kind of
Yeah, and
expect it to like not go well the first time, then it's like, well, this is according to plan, so it doesn't matter.
yeah, and like I think I mean from a IT projects perspective, you're basically kind of talking about waterfall methods versus agile methods of projects of delivery. So if you look at perfectionism as a waterfall, like this must happen and then that will happen and then that
Mm,
will happen and then that will happen, but like that's not how life happens and that's not how projects happen. You have to be agile, you have to be able to adjust because things are going to come up that you didn't know, that you couldn't predict, things are going to
mm,
change. All sorts of impacts that you had no idea when you started out
we're gonna
is
happen.
yeah. And
Okay.
so I think embracing that whole like you're not going to be very good when you start something and things are going to change and your priorities will change and your values will change and you will change as a person and just kind of accepting that and going with it.
Mm, okay. I was interested because like usually if there's a project, or let's say it's something where let's say someone were to hand something to me at work that like is a big project, I would just assume that I could do it, but I don't expect. I think maybe the slight difference is I don't expect it to go perfectly. I expect a few iterations of it for me to have it down. So I don't know. Maybe it's. Um, I think we are in the same, or maybe it's the connection to the word should. Maybe that's what it is. Like,
How do you
because I'm thinking like I can if someone's describing a project to me or a spreadsheet or something that is coming up, based on the estimate of my capabilities, like I can estimate if I should be able to execute this project, if that makes sense. But I don't have if there is an error or there's a part of the project or a query that I'm trying to build that like I didn't expect, it doesn't. I don't have I guess a negative reaction to the negative to it not flowing through completely the first time. That makes sense.
yeah, I think from my career perspective I was a bit different.
Mm,
So like as a where I am now, it's more of like there's nothing that can happen that I can't handle. I know that now. And so it's just a matter of figuring
mm,
out what do I
how
need
to
to
make it
practice? What do
happen?
I need to learn? How do we make it happen?
Yeah.
And that goes back to the tech startup side as well, because at the moment it's like there's so much I don't know. And instead of feeling overwhelmed by it, which is how I would have felt in the past, it's like, okay, well, what's the next thing that I need to learn rather than thinking I need to learn all of it. So part of
Mm-hmm.
it is really learning that chunking things down isn't just a project management thing. It's an everyday thing of like, I can't take on everything at once. What's that one little piece that I can do right now in the present moment, and just keep doing just that one little bit, and keep making progress.
Yeah.
But in my professional career, I think I just always assumed I could do something because I guess I just assumed no one would hand me work unless I was capable of it.
Mm.
Like
Okay.
I
Yeah.
never,
Yeah.
I don't think I ever took on a role that I thought, oh, I can't do this role,
Mm.
because I also worked with a lot of really brilliant people. Like I met some really brilliant people and I worked with
Yeah.
brilliant people. So there was always someone I could ask. So like, if there was a tech issue, there was always an architect or an engineer who just knew what they were doing, and we could sit in front of a whiteboard and work something out. So in my professional career, I think because I worked in such big teams, there was always someone I could ask a question. And one thing that has benefited me through life is I have always asked a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're comfortable to ask a question and not worry about looking silly because you asked a question, like you can learn a lot really quickly. And people people are happy to share.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, and I don't think there's ever a stupid question.
Mm. I don't think so either, even though sometimes I feel stupid asking them. So it's like, well, now I know. It's like I had to
There's no
ask.
stupid question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think interestingly, if somebody responds to you as if you've asked a stupid question, then it'd be
Usually it's an ego
interesting to
problem.
understand, yeah, what was the trigger for them
Yeah.
to respond that way.
Yeah. Sometimes at work, even if it's not a dumb question, they still act like it. And it's like, I don't know, man.
Yeah, like why is that their reaction?
Yeah. So really quick, I just wanted to touch on this word should, because there's some stuff like touted on social media where it's like, if you want to be, because I'm really into the masculine part of the algorithms or whatever, it's like you should be working out, for example. Like what would be your thoughts on generally accepted as good behaviors, like working out, eating healthy, making sure your money's right? So these areas
Oh,
that maybe you touch on as
in the
health.
context of should?
Yeah, in the context of should, because it's like you should be working out is kind of like a general universal statement or blanket statement
Okay,
that's used.
so the way I have reworked the language in my draft books is,
Mm.
if you want dot dot dot, then you can.
If you
So
want, then
if
you
you
can.
want to, if you want longevity, and if you want to be off medicine for a long term, if you want to have a retirement that you can enjoy,
Oh.
then
Mm.
you need to take care of your body. How do you take care of your body? Oh, okay. Well, that's where you start to get resistance training and
Okay.
cardio and these sorts of things. So to me, it's if you want this, then you need to do that.
Yeah.
It's
That.
rather than you should gym. It's like, well, fine, if you're not into, like for a while I used to gym 5 days a week. I kind of got into bodybuilding for a bit.
Mm. You have
And
such a
now
diverse like background of things you got into. It's pretty interesting to listen to.
yeah, I like a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But so I got into gymming for a while. Like my husband and I took it really seriously, and then like I got pregnant, and I still kind of gymmed pretty much up until I gave birth, because it was like my outlet, because I didn't have any other outlets at the time. And so I would like come home from work and like either listen to loud music or gym, because that was all I had to regulate my emotions.
Yeah.
Or I played like Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing for like a lot of time. But they were I've moved beyond needing video games and music to regulate. But anyway, I still enjoy them, but I don't need them to regulate anymore.
Yeah.
So I was gymming for a while, and I forgot where I was going with the story. What were we talking about?
Oh, we're talking about the use of should, but you switch it to
Oh,
if you want,
yeah. So
then.
now, so for a while, I started to feel guilty because I know that gymming is good for me. And then I realized that I don't, just because I have the gym equipment and just because I know gymming is good for me doesn't mean that I can't stay healthy. So if you want to stay healthy as a mum, you don't have to separate from your kids to go and gym for 45 minutes. I can, when they're engaged in something, I can do push-ups next to them, or I can do like yoga, and I can chase them around the house really like a lot, or I can lift them up and play physical games with them and rough play and that sort of thing. Like I can incorporate strength training into what is important to me and what I do have time for. And I think that comes back to that, instead of you should gym or you should, do this many minutes of cardio, it's like, what is the outcome that you want? Well, I want to be healthy in my retirement. I don't want to be on medication and stuck in bed, and I want to walk. So for me, I need to exercise, and letting go of that perfectionism of I should gym X amount of days a week for this amount of time, and I have to hit these muscle groups and do this many reps. Like I had to move away from that and go, okay, well, what are some goals that I can work towards that I can do within the lifestyle that I have without it being something that I'm not going to do because it's too hard to like get that situation when like kids are unpredictable and like toddlers need 100%. You at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
So yeah, so if you want this, then you can. And then there's multiple ways that you can achieve fitness without having to go to a gym, physically getting in your car and driving to a gym. You know, like I have a home gym instead. Well, like I say home gym, it's like, you know, I bought free weights and a bench and a barbell thing. It's in the garage. But you know, there are multiple ways you can achieve that outcome. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be training like the guys that you see on Instagram. You can incorporate into your life. And then I think that you can have your ideal self, your ideal behaviors, and be on your way there rather than like it's either all or nothing.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I'd love to gym every day, and I would love to do yoga at sunrise every morning. But like that's just not where I am in my life right now. It's not the season of life I'm in. So instead, I'll like do yoga with my kids climbing on top of me, which makes yoga a strength building activity, right? Because like you got an extra, I don't know how much between the two of them, 30 something kilos. Yeah. So yeah, it's just trying to find, it's removing that perfectionism and looking at what is it that you want, and then what are the options for you to get there, not you should do this. It's like, okay, well, like take a step backwards, look at your big picture, and how are you really going to get there?
Okay.
Instead of shooting yourself and feeling guilty because you didn't go to the gym today.
Yeah. That was kind of interesting when you mentioned should versus if you want, then it's even the language feeling, I guess it's weird to say the language feeling in my body was like should is like very direct, and if there's a not, then it's a hard stop. Like if it's a should, like I should go to the gym but I don't, then it's a hard stop, and I can feel like a weight in front of me. But if it's like if you want, then it feels a lot lighter and like easy going.
Yeah, and I think for me the word should comes with obligation. Why should you do it? Because somebody else told you you should? What is that you really want? And so when you focus on like if you want, then you can, instead of like I should go to the gym, you can be like, I didn't go to the gym today and I really wanted to. If the end goal is just general fitness, okay, well then just go for a walk today, and tomorrow go to the gym, or tomorrow do something else, or make sure you do it earlier so that it doesn't like get dropped off your list. But like I think removing the word should allows space for self-compassion and flexibility. And I know I'm very focused on personal growth, and I take on a lot. Like there's no, like I'm not one of these people that talks about it and then doesn't do it. Like I take on a lot, but I also understand that it's okay to take on a lot and just make little bits of progress in different areas, and that it's okay to be flexible, and that it's okay to make mistakes along the way, and it's okay to like not hold yourself to these unrelenting standards.
Yeah, it's been a process. Sorry. It's definitely like I was raised kind of on the growth mindset, like just that's how my dad raised me, so it makes sense. What you're saying makes a lot of sense to me and just resonates because that's just you just make small steps and there you
go. Yeah. I it's interesting how differently that would have affected you. You probably wouldn't have been as successful in your taekwondo if you had grown with without a growth mindset.
I definitely don't think so. There was also a book when I was 16 called Thinking Body, Dancing Mind, where I was conflicted between my dad's advice, different coaches' advice, because some coaches are very like Western style, like it's all or nothing, you're not first or last kind of deal. And so I was very conflicted between those, and I was like, some of this stuff doesn't seem logical, because if I wanted to win all the times, why don't I just fight kindergartners? Like I'd win every tournament. And so I ended up reading this book, and it taught very Eastern philosophies about growth and just progress and focus on that. And that was really, I think, one of the biggest turning points, I'd say, in my mindset was reading that book at like the age of 14 and then really implementing each little bit of it.
So. Yeah, so you obviously had a focus on growth if you were reading that kind of material at 14, which is awesome.
I was like at 14, I knew I wanted to make the Olympics, and I knew, even though my stature now is tall, in my division, I'm fighting people who are like 2 or 3 inches taller than I'm. Like the average height, I think, in my division is like 6'5". So these guys are like massive. And
I have no idea how tall you are.
oh, I'm 6'3". So some people are like, oh, you're so tall. That's awesome for the sport. It's like, yeah, until you put me in the heavyweight division where everyone's like 6'5" and 6'7". Like, I'm actually short.
I'm so much shorter than you. But okay, that's really interesting.
But yeah. So well, what I'd read was essentially that to be a top athlete, these are certain things you have to do. You have good training plan, good nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, my genetics are not exactly the best built for this, but I want to win here. So like I have to use everything available, and one of them was visualizations and mindset. And so I was like, okay,
Well,
that's one
see,
of the things.
that would be really interesting if you came up against someone who, like, do you ever watch boxing?
Sometimes I rarely like watch other sports because like this doesn't affect my taekwondo.
So I like boxing every now and then, mostly
Mm,
only like big matches, just every now and then. But I remember watching Anthony Joshua and I can't remember his name now. He wasn't expected to win. He's Mexican, I think. He looked a lot less fit than Anthony Joshua, who
mm,
like is kind of your definition of fit.
yeah,
And Anthony Joshua lost, and I wasn't surprised at the end. There were a lot of people like, "Whoa, that's insane!" And I was like, "Yeah," because I bet he went into that fight thinking, "Yeah, I'm going to beat this guy. Look, he's overweight, and like I'm just going to beat him because like I'm fitter than him." I
yeah,
could understand that he probably, I have no idea. I didn't actually look into it after, but I imagine he went into that with the mindset of like, I'm going to win this, which is what we were talking about earlier, where I was like, oh, like I don't have to try as hard because I'm this.
mm,
Whereas the other guy would have come in the mindset of like, this is Anthony Joshua. If I'm going to have a chance, I got to go all in. He probably trained a lot harder.
yeah,
And so like you can get around physical stature and like
oh yeah,
assumed things that would make you win by nailing your basics and working really hard, basically.
yeah. Everything is. I think it wasn't like you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your system. I think was more
James Clear, I think, is that?
I think maybe I just remember hearing that, and I was like, or one. I think before I got more analytical, it was like you fall to the level of your training, but then I was like, but your training is if it's not systemized, is not good. So you fall to the level like that's
You fall to level these systems. Yeah,
yeah.
it makes sense. And
Um,
that also comes in with a lot like when you have other stresses in life, like if you don't have your foundations sorted,
oh
things
yeah,
start to fall apart.
yeah, 100%. Oh, what I wanted to ask actually was kind of moving away from like personal development, but like now so more so with you and your husband, because it sounds like you and your husband have both studied personal development and relationship and communication techniques to have a better marriage. Because if you can communicate better, like obviously it's better for both parties. I was wondering, like I remember hearing in one podcast before that though, you had mentioned your husband had made you feel safe, let you felt you put your walls down around him. Like what stuff about your husband made you feel that way?
Truly unconditional love.
Okay,
So
could you
he
describe
never, yeah,
traits of that?
he never changed the way he treated me or loved me less if I made a mistake or if I behaved differently.
Mm,
Um, and that was different to my experiences in most of our relationships growing up and throughout life. It was kind of like I felt expected to behave a particular way. I felt expected to be easygoing. And if I wasn't, I felt a retreat from other people.
okay.
Um, and if I did something stupid, which we all do, we all make mistakes. If I did something stupid, or if there was never judgment he didn't treat me like I was. He didn't treat me any differently if I made mistakes, and he accepted me wholeheartedly, no matter what I said and no matter what I did. So it's kind of the things that I say to my kids and I try and impart on my kids. I have felt that and learnt that a bit from my husband as well.
Okay.
Like that, it how do I put this? Um, you have mostly male listeners, so I feel a bit awkward saying this, but
Okay.
um, like as a female, I think we are conditioned to be cautious, not cautious, self-conscious of our bodies. And my husband
I
is,
think there's a lot of societal pressure for that.
yeah. And like my husband, I can be entirely naked around in any way, in any context, and be totally fine with that.
Mm,
Um, and yet if I step out of that and like, I'll be clothed again, but like any little thing that I feel I'm expected to do, I would feel the fear of judgment from other people. And so it's a weird example, but it's like even my bare self, like I never felt any judgment from him, and I never felt like he treated me any differently, because I'm a female. Certain times a month where you get bloated and you don't feel very confident how you look and things like that. Like there's never been any point that I ever felt judged or loved less, no matter how I looked and no matter what I did. And I think it's that unconditional acceptance for who I am, and no matter what happens.
I'm gonna try and break this down into like traits, because like for male listeners, I'm listening to this and it's like that sounds fantastic, and then I'm sure there's some guy in the audience who's like me at 16. It's like, how do I put that? How do I make those traits apparent in my relationship?
Oh, I think it's like because neither of us really knew how to communicate emotions or feel our feelings, so it's not like that was something that worked for us then. But it was more of a if you're in the right
oh, go ahead.
If you're in the right relationship, I think you married your best friend.
Okay.
Right. And so I think it's that one, being with someone who's your best friend, and then just continuing to show up for them, and knowing that like no matter what's happening in the short term or in the immediate, that like look at the long term, and don't withdraw yourself. Like you see people have these conversations like maybe the relationship is over because they had a fight. Like we never ever had. I think we've been together for 16 years, and there was like one or two. Sorry, our doorbell is updating itself, and every time it does, it rings, and it rings on all the Google speakers, and it's like a song that my husband made.
I could hear. I could hear
it. I'm just waiting. Somebody acted. No, it just keeps rebooting itself. So it's kind of like you can't withdraw because somebody has made a mistake, or because they're showing you a side of themselves that is different. So if you feel like you're distancing yourself or questioning the relationship because of something you've seen, maybe it's not the right relationship. Whereas with my husband, like there's never been a point like
where he withdrew and you felt like that.
Or that our relationship was in threat or anything like that. It's always just been kind of like shitty about a particular situation or a particular argument or something. That's how it used to be. But it was never like it was never an attack on me as a person or my character. It was kind of like acceptance of me, but like that behavior I don't like, which kind of translates into the parenting stuff, right? So instead of our kids growing up feeling like they're not worthy or anything like that, it's particular behaviors are not acceptable. So all feelings are acceptable and normal and understandable and valid, but all behaviors are not necessarily.
That's a very good distinction. Distinction. Yeah. Okay. That's what I was going for. I promise I can speak. It also sounds so as you're describing his traits, and he's not withdrawing, and the relationship is not under attack. It sounds like number one, that would you describe him as like being stoic or like being a rock emotionally, or was the emotion
not necessarily.
not necessarily. Okay, so it's not necessarily that. It's
no.
Maybe it was conflict resolution. Like during conflict resolution, there's no personal attacks. It's always about the behavior, and that's even though you guys learn communication now, that was like maybe one of the base stones.
I think so.
Okay.
It's hard. So he's my rock in terms of like he's my support, but in terms of not necessarily because the reason I hesitate there is because I feel like if you say that someone's stoic, there's this expectation that they don't show emotions. So my husband in the past has been better at showing his emotions than me, and like when I grew up, like my dad never cried. I just thought men don't cry and women cry. And then when I started dating my husband, I was just like, oh, men cry. Like I was really awkward the first time he cried in front of me, and then I just kind of got used to it because he was comfortable with his feelings. And then it's interesting because he had cried in front of me, and then like it wasn't until years later when we started this journey that I kind of realized, or he told me that actually he doesn't cry in front of other people, and it was just something that he felt comfortable with me. So it's got to do with that comfort of like being able to be yourself raw and not feel rejected and not feel like someone withdraws from you because you've shown them a part of yourself that you've probably been hiding from other people.
Okay, so it was also so it sounds like also it's a part on it's also your part of accepting him even at his most vulnerable moment when he was in tears and then you like didn't withdraw, which I can imagine if you did actually withdraw, that would have been fairly devastating from a guy's point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is I would say this is good stuff for especially for listeners because I know that some of my audience is, even though I'm gearing it toward like married men, there's people who are like aspirational to be in a relationship, and some of them don't last very long relationships, and they want to know how to make a long relationship last.
Well, I think there's two parts to that, right? There's one,
Mm.
you need to work on yourself, and um, you need to be confident in yourself, and you have to do all the work that you yourself are not expecting too much of your partner. But the second thing is like, don't settle. Like, find that person that
Mm.
is your best friend. Like, don't just don't just want to have a relationship and then just make a relationship work. It's got to be the right relationship. That's my opinion. Like, you don't
Yeah.
just I mean, and I don't come from a background where we've got arranged marriages or anything. So
Mm.
so I know that there are cultural impacts of that depending on where you come from. But for me, like, you got to marry your best friend. And that's not saying like go and marry your best friend. It's like the person that you want to be with. If they're not your best friend, then maybe it's not the longer term relationship that you want.
Mm. Especially because I think maybe in this context, like best friend means someone you can be around, no problem. Like no, there's no masks around your best friend, and then
No masks. And also, like, if something exciting happens, who's the first person you want to tell? If something bad
yeah, yeah.
happens, who's the first person you want to tell? If you need help, who are you going to call? Like,
Mm.
all of those things, like, it's not to say that they're going to be the only person in your life. Like, obviously, if you don't have anyone else, you become too dependent on them, and that has its own issues. But like, they got to be your person that like you fully and wholeheartedly trust and want to spend time with and want to be with. And yeah, I can't imagine I can imagine that there's a lot of people who are trying to make relationships work that maybe they do love that person and they've got communication issues, or they've got things that each of them need to work on themselves. And then you've got people who are trying to make a relationship work for fear of being alone.
Yeah, yeah, and that one's
Or
definitely
fear of,
not good.
yeah, or like, biological clock, I want to have kids, and like, this
Marry
is
this dude.
available now.
This guy's here
Yeah.
now. Let's go.
This guy's here now. Yeah, no, so but I saw a post on Instagram today, something about like, people spend so much time making certain decisions, and then they don't spend as much time making decisions around like who they're going to marry. But like, it's one of the biggest impacts to like your life.
Oh yeah, that's definitely really important.
Yeah. Because it's like, it determines so much of like who you're going to become and what you're going to achieve in life and what your life is going to be like. Because if you marry
Yeah.
someone you don't get along with, like,
It's gonna be
great, you're going to spend every day the rest of your life with them.
hard life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I'm also just curious because it sounds so. Just from the stuff I've read and I've studied, part of you being able to open up and feeling unconditionally loved was your husband had set an environment of like psychological safety for you, so you
Yeah,
feel like you're okay
as well
doing
put.
that. One of the traits of that is one. It sounds like not necessarily having no emotion, but it sounds like he. Yes, stoicism isn't the right word because stoicism isn't having no emotion. It's being able to handle your own emotions and process them and like essentially regulate. That's like one
I
aspect of it. Um, but the other aspect of creating an environment of psychological safety, as far as I can surmise, is the tonality in which you speak to someone. Were either of those like contributing factors, or were those like not really contributing factors? There's another factor that made you feel safe around him.
I think it's interesting. You've mentioned tonality a few times. For me, it's not necessarily tonality or body language. Yes, I care about those things and about conscious language, but I think it's also intent.
The intent, okay, because well,
The
I say
intent.
tonality because sometimes I have the intent, but the tone isn't wrong, so my intent is misinterpreted.
Yes,
That's
and that's a communication issue that
yeah.
can be worked through. But if
I'm
the
better about it
intent
now,
is
but
there,
before I was like, why don't people just understand that this is what I'm trying to? Yeah, it's because the tonality.
yeah, but if you have the right intent, then you can work through that. You can communicate, and even with poor communication skills, if you're willing to try and you have the right intent, then you can work through those things.
Okay.
But
And
if you don't have the intent of understanding the other person and of wanting to make the relationship last, then
okay.
you know, like you have to have that intent of like not just being there for them, but wanting to help them as a person
Mm-hmm.
to be
Makes
their
sense.
best self, and to want to do that longer term, not just like, can we just resolve this issue that we have right now? No, it's not about that. It's about that other person and you being their rock, and you being there for them and understanding them and helping them feel safe and helping them feel seen and heard and
Mm-hmm.
validated.
Yeah. Okay. So it almost sounds like maybe during these arguments, one of the things that I teach the guys is like you need to have a long term vision, or at least like that you guys are gonna make. And so I guess was during these just so I can kind of understand properly. So if if there's a guy and he wants to make his wife feel more safe, and this he doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily stoic. It's not really tonality, but he has the intent to he has the intent and he is able to express that, like, look, I want this to work in the long term, and this is what we have to handle now. Like that's a situation that makes you feel safe as a spouse.
Yeah.
Or
So and we can go back to our checklist idea,
mm-hmm.
in that there are things that you can do that improve your relationship if you have that checklist in your mind. So things
Okay.
like I think it's a 6-to-1 or 5-to-1 ratio.
5 to 1, I think,
um,
if you're the
5-to-1 of like
difficulties
positive.
to negative interactions. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you like consciously have that in your mind, like this is something I really consciously practice with my kids, and it just naturally flowing over into my marriage. Like the more
Mm-hmm.
effort we each put into becoming better parents, like our marriage just improves,
Mm-hmm.
because naturally we're practicing the things that are just like healthy relationship things,
Yeah.
which is what you're trying to do for your kids. But like consciously noticing, like if you're about to criticize, one, pausing, and am I criticizing because, like, why am I criticizing? Is there something that could be a problem that we could solve together and I could change my language and the way I'm going to go about this?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I criticizing because I'm feeling grumpy and like I'm just taking it out on the person I feel safe to take it out on? And if you're going to do that, like be conscious about it and let them know, like, I'm having a hard time and I'm feeling frustrated about X, rather than you did this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then also having that running in your head, like, okay, if I'm feeling this way, and I know I'm going to be projecting a little bit because I'm just not regulated right now, then I can consciously put the effort into like doing extra, like making sure I compliment extra, or I go over and above on doing
Yeah.
something extra to like balance out the crappy bits, because like everybody has crappy bits.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So it's almost like a very expressive communication, and to a point where you're saying where you're at. And so like what I'm saying, even if it's grumpy, etc., it's not like I'm like trying to process my own thing right now. So don't take offense to like what's going on.
Yes,
Okay.
that. Yes. And
Okay.
like also like getting to know each other's like triggers and things.
Oh
So
yeah.
like uh if one of you experienced like the silent treatment when you were younger, and so silence is a bad thing, and then one of you experienced where like silence is better because you were used to screaming, like those are two very different dynamics and very different ways that you handle conflict. So what if one of you like shuts down a little bit because like it's a bit too scary when it gets loud, and the other one is like, oh, your silence is scary, like those little emotional triggers that you may not realize you have. That's why like working on yourself and understanding yourself and like your own attachments as a kid and that sort of thing makes a big difference, because you can understand like, oh, okay, I'm feeling triggered because of the way they're behaving, and they're behaving that way because of their childhood too. So the more
Mm-hmm.
you like get to know each other's, we
Yeah.
can call them quirks.
Quirks
The
is a
more you
good
get
way
to
to
know
put
each
it.
other's things that you're working on, the like the more compassion you can have for each other as well, and that compassion kind of breeds into a healthier relationship,
Mm.
I think.
Yeah, I would say so. I think as you're growing, as long as you're paying attention, like something that was told to me in marriage mentorship was like, you as a husband will know your wife better than anyone else, and that's like up to you to know. And the original word of husband was supposed to be husbandry, which is like care for. I think it was. I don't know the
Care for
exact.
animals, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Husbandry.
But it's because like you as a husband will know like how to best take care of the things under his like that will how to best take care of um, the things you care about. I guess, if that makes sense. So
Yes.
things and then people. So wife and then kids, etc., etc.
That's interesting. I never considered the origin of the word. I wonder where wife comes from.
I don't know where wife comes from. I really just look at one side of the equation.
Well, you kind of got to look at two sides of the equation too.
Yeah. Oh, I look at the other side so far, insofar as like, is this system effective or is it not effective?
Very
But
logically thinking.
I'm very analytical. So one of the things you mentioned a lot, especially, is like regulating, dysregulating. I remember you mentioned something like, is there a way you can train your nervous system to for this regulation to between dysregulation, regulation between like feeling maybe safe and unsafe? Because
Yeah. So for me, it's it's kind of weird. Like I came to this understanding from like a very diverse range of learnings. Um, but your nervous system, as far as I can tell, it has a memory of when you have been safe or unsafe and how did you behave, and therefore that behavior will save me again, right?
yeah,
And so you've got two sides of it. One is learning how to recognize you are dysregulated and knowing how to um, uh, regulate yourself and switch your prefrontal cortex back online and all that sort of stuff. Which, by the way, usually just comes down to breathing.
yeah,
You can do physiological size and like reconnect everything.
yeah.
It goes great. But the second side is actually questioning whether you're safe. So I
Mm,
remember like from Huberman Lab learning about cold exposure and all this sort of stuff.
yeah, yeah. Cold
And
plunges.
and yeah, and I've moved to Tasmania. It's cold here. And like my husband and I would be forever chasing our kids around, like, please put a jacket on, please put a jacket on.
Mm,
But we're also learning that like we're teaching them, hey, don't eat because we told you it's dinner time. Eat because you are hungry, right?
okay.
So we're trying to teach them to listen to their bodies. Rest because you need rest, not because it has to be rest time. And eat because you're feeling hungry, not because I say this is the time we have dinner. And if you are feeling cold, warm your body up or grab a jacket or go inside or whatever you need to do. So in learning that we needed to step back and let them take care of their bodies, we had to deal with the discomfort for us, like, oh, they're going to be unsafe. But actually they're not, because if they get cold, they feel uncomfortable and they want to come inside. The fact that they're happy to run around with minimal clothing on um,
Mm,
in freezing cold, like, was beyond me. And then I started learning about cold exposure, and I was like, okay, so there's this point where like I grew up being conditioned that, hey, if you go outside and there's a wind, you're going to catch a cold, you're going to get pneumonia and die, right? So to me, my nervous system was like, okay, cold equals death, therefore unsafe.
mm,
But then the more I learned about it, the more I would like just literally stand outside, and I thought when you shiver, that must mean like you need to go inside, you're going to get sick.
mm.
But then I learned that shivering is actually the burning up of brown fat in your body to warm your body up. And so I started
Burn.
paying attention inside my body.
Okay. Burning up
So
brown
brown,
fat. Yeah, I haven't heard that term before, but
oh, brown fat is like I think it is actually physically brown, but it's like the fat that's ready to warm your body up. You've got like fat pads, I think, in the back
oh,
of your neck in certain areas.
okay.
And so like that physical feeling of
Oh,
shivering
that's
isn't
why.
like I'm unsafe.
I see.
It's the burning
Interesting.
up, right?
Interesting.
And if you pay attention, if you like are cold enough and you shiver and then you like just pay attention to your body, you'll notice you feel warmer.
Mm,
You don't have to take action because your body did something. That's not an unsafe thing. That's your body regulating its temperature. So my kids inherently knew that. And they know that because like they shiver and then they feel warm again. And they're like, no, I don't need a jacket. Leave me
burn
alone.
around. Yeah.
And so like I started questioning things and being like, okay, well, what else do I think is unsafe that's like not safe? So
But that is
my
safe.
husband, yeah, and sorry, that is safe. Like my husband watches a lot of NRL. And so at first when our kids were younger, I was like, oh, sorry, NRL is National Rugby League. It's like
Oh, okay, okay.
Australian
Yeah.
rugby
More,
league.
more intense football for Americans.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
You guys are
More
hardcore.
intense. Yeah. Yeah, without all the padding stuff, which
Yeah.
anyway,
That's
so my husband watches a lot of this. And when my kids were really young, I was like, no, I can't show them that. And then after I was like, no, it's actually good for them. Like they can see what competitive sport is like, they can see what athleticism is. And
mm,
because we homeschool and because we're both quite nerdy in like really weird ways, my like we'll go, okay, that guy had an injury, and then we'll like follow the physios who will explain the injury and break it down, how long is it going to take to heal and what's broken, and show, and like we'll talk our kids through that too.
mm.
And so like we'll watch it, and like, you know, these guys, like they get hammered.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty sure I'd be in hospital for a long time, but these guys get like seriously physically hurt, and then next week they're there again.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of these things that I thought were really unsafe, I'm like, well, actually your body kind of heals from that pretty quick. So like, even if I feel uncomfortable that like my kid might get hurt, they're not going to die. So it's okay for me to just regulate and let them, and they can make their own mistakes without me like hovering over them like, no, you can't do that because you're going to get hurt. But it's okay if they get hurt, they will heal.
Yeah.
There's obviously like lines to that. You can't just let them play with knives.
Yeah.
But like, you know, you don't have to freak out because they're climbing on something that's a bit too high. If they fall and break their arm will heal.
I think especially as a kid too, I remember hearing we have my wife's cousin works at Google like daycare or something like that, and they said as a kid it's actually okay to let them play because kids will actually heal quicker than you do as an adult. So if you are going to test limits, it's better to test limit as a kid.
Yeah, rather than like
you're 30
yeah,
and now it's going to take 4 months.
and then you've still got to take care of children while you're unwell.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. But yeah, so for me it's like when I notice that I'm dysregulated now, in the moment I try and like regulate myself and deal with whatever's happening in the present, but I spend more time analyzing it later, not from like a rehashing and I used to ruminate a lot, but now instead of ruminating, it's looking at it and going, well, why is it that I thought that was unsafe? And like, because in that moment you've recognized, okay, they are safe, or I am safe, whatever it is, and you regulate. Each time you do that, you're creating evidence for your nervous system and your body to say, oh, I was safe in that scenario, so maybe actually take it off the unsafe list. So that I think that's how it really feeds back into the comfort zones model. You know, most people know the comfort zones model, and it, like the comfort zones model to me was a great theory, but it wasn't until I really understood cold exposure, oddly, that I was like, oh, okay, it makes sense, because every time you step out of the comfort zone and you survive, your brain and nervous system are like, oh, okay, that's no longer unsafe. I can add it to the comfort zone. And that's why your comfort zone gets bigger. And that's why you know, there's certain people who are willing to do things that other people aren't, because they know it's safe. They've already had that experience.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a lot of it comes down to, and if you take it back to relationships, it's okay and safe for me to tell my partner how I'm feeling, even if they don't like, even if their feelings might be hurt. Again, if you've got the intent of like sharing how you're feeling and trying to work it out, it's safe to do that. And if the relationship isn't safe for you to do that, it's probably not the right relationship.
Oh yeah, 100%. I agree. That's and it's interesting too that you're able to tie that back to relationships, because I think a lot of people see, at least a lot of guys see, like sport is like one box in the mind, and then relationships are another box.
No, I'm pretty sure for my husband, sport just is the box that goes with everything, and other things just kind of fit picture in picture. Kind
of sprinkled in on top.
Yeah. But yeah, you can learn a lot from sport.
Yeah. And then I think it's interesting to, especially as a listener, if I was like a guy, to be able to, number one, open up and understand that it's safe, because I don't know if, I think every guy has their own like life journey, right? But like opening up was not something I felt I was able to do until I obtained strength and maybe even considered power in Taekwondo, where it's like, well, it doesn't really matter if I cry and you think that's dumb, because if we fight, I'm still going to beat you. Like there's a way to compensate for it.
Yeah, we also don't need to compensate too. It's
Yeah.
okay to feel however you're feeling. Like that learning for me, because I grew up, I think so for me, when I grew up, I was like one of the guys. And I think that comes from having parents who were divorced at a young age. I got raised by a male mostly. Right? Yeah. So I got my conditioning and my behavioral models came from a male model. So, which is why, like, one of the things we've talked about is, we talked about on Instagram how I think that a lot of people think that men and women are so different, but actually we're not. It's just our conditioning. Like if you condition men and women to be different, they're going to be different. But like, I grew up very pragmatic and logical, because it was kind of like, yeah, you don't need to cry about that because it's not a big deal, or here, you can fix it. Like it was like, if you could logically fix something, then you can invalidate the emotion. Like you don't need to feel the emotion because you can fix the problem. But for me, that led to my inability to just feel a feeling and like deal with it. So because of that, I really struggled with things that were outside of my control, because I couldn't fix them, but I didn't know how to deal with the emotion. So it became this like stuck in my body. I didn't know what to do, and so it like came out in anxiety and then like repressed emotions and all sorts of crap.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I was actually well when you brought that up, I actually just got started thinking like now that you are, um, I guess, more in tune with your authentic self, and it's important for you to process the emotions. I was trying to think of like in my experience when I do talk to guys, it's generally like it may be because I remember so I don't know if this is like 100% true. I heard this from another video where it was like women tend to feel more like more emotions more intensely than men do for the most part. I don't know where you stand on that. Is that true? Is that not true? I think obviously it depends, but like on a wide sweeping brushstroke scale, like women will feel more
I,
emotion, which is why women remember more things than men do because
well,
men don't really
maybe women have been allowed to feel more emotions,
maybe that's what it is.
because if you were raised that like boys don't cry, well, you've learned that it's not okay for you to cry, but girls are allowed to cry.
Hmm.
So like, and there's all sorts of things that feed into that. I don't think I mean, hormonally, I've been pregnant. I know there are periods in your life that you feel more emotions,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there is
for
nothing
sure.
you can do about it, right? So yes, there are points in a female's life that they probably have more emotional turmoil and emotional um, storms within their body, for lack of a better word. But I think men have been conditioned not to feel their feelings, and I say that with a small amount of confidence because I came from the very like I've been called cold-hearted and that sort of thing in the past, because I had that very male view of like, well, no, if you've got a problem, you go and solve it rather than feel the feelings about it. So I've read stuff about how, you know, women want to tell you about their day as something hard that happened because they just want to let it out, whereas men will then something that apparently
Yeah,
happens in
most
a lot
guys are
of
conditioned
relationships.
just like this is. Yeah, I'm hearing issues.
They
This is
fix
the
the
fix.
problem.
Yeah, yeah. Versus
Correct.
feeling
Whereas,
heard.
like, one of the big learnings for me has been to ask, do you just want me to listen, or do you want me to help you solve the problem?
Hmm.
And like I had to learn that, and that's something that would be something that men would have to learn. And I get that point of view because I had that very, what might be considered like a male approach to emotions.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
tend to think again that that's just how I was conditioned and what I was modeled. And for me, I kind of grew up where I actually had the view that like women were more emotional because like I'm a bit younger than my sisters, and so when they went through puberty, I saw how my dad reacted to them, and then I like learned like, okay, I
Cut
don't
my
want
dad
to.
off or just make dad mad.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that, and so it was
Hmm.
kind of like I saw his behavior change towards them when they were having big feelings, and then so like I think I just internalized all my feelings. So I was like, okay, so people might retreat from me if I show them how I'm feeling,
Mm.
which is kind of different conditioning from being expected not to feel your feelings, but it's the same outcome, right? You just kind of repress things or hold them in or deny your own feelings to the point that you start to feel numb because you just don't know how to experience them. And like starting to feel emotions for the first time was intense, like
Mm.
really intense. There's a lot of stuff that you just like you've never
For
really
you,
let
yeah,
yourself feel
would
and you don't
repress.
realize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying like right now I'm reflecting on like my own experiences as a guy and talking to other guys. I think I mean there's quite possibly the idea that guys are conditioned just maybe to not express their emotions, but I'm also trying to think of like even among really trusted circle of guys that where I could let emotions in, like a lot of our conversation doesn't go in that direction even if there's an issue. It's generally still information back and forth and ways to navigate a problem. So I don't know, just maybe in my experience as a guy it's different.
Yeah. And maybe because, I mean, if you go back to that definition of husband and husbandry, it's
Mm,
your job to take care of. If you grew up and you believed it was your job to take care of your wife and your kids, you might behave differently than if you grew up being told that women are emotional and that it's okay to feel your feelings, but also that just women have emotions and men don't. Right. So, okay, well, if that's a woman thing, then I need to go and solve my problem because I'm not meant to have these emotions potentially. I mean, I don't know. that part, but I do think that there are a lot of things that are presumed to be male or female that like I don't believe is true in terms of like inherently we are that different. I think there's a lot of things that are just conditioned.
Okay.
Consider neuroplasticity. You have the ability to change anything, right? So if I
Yeah,
wanted to become more male or more female, and I knew what the differences were, I could just practice them and then be better at them. So therefore, why isn't it related to your base programming and your conditioning in the first place? Is my view.
I'm like trying to in my head. I'm like I'm like mental mapping.
Okay, so let's take it as a slightly different one. You
Sure.
grew up with this view, like, okay, I can be a Taekwondo Olympian, right? You had this view, like, I can be a Taekwondo champion. A female without any other females in Taekwondo might want that path and not see it as an option because there aren't any other role models there, and therefore the modeling and the conditioning isn't the same. If you're a male and you wanted to get in sport, like now it's different. Now there's a lot of females in sport, and my kid, I can see the difference of modeling, right? Because I grew up like men play sport, and you watch men on TV, and now like my husband makes a point of putting on the men and the women of like whatever sport we watch. So there's a lot of sport. but when my kids, so I've got two girls, when they see the women play, they play. They will then go and play that sport. So we can watch. He'll watch the NRL every single week. Yeah, he can watch the NRL every single week. But until he watches NRLW, which is the women's version, they kind of like, oh yeah, cool. Oh look, yep, he's doing a great job kicking, whatever. But then they watch the women and they play because they see, oh, okay, and now they're starting to believe, oh, women play sport too, right? So if it comes back to everything, like if you believe a particular thing, yeah, and so if you're conditioned and believe a particular thing, and you're not taught to question that, then you kind of just assume, well, that's like, to me, it's another form of a limited mindset, is being conditioned to believe that you are a particular way because of your gender or because of where you grew up or because of XYZ reason.
So I understand your point with the model, and what I'm in my head, what I'm trying to think about it like is, if it would be, if my current model that I'm running would be improved by the addition, I guess, if that makes sense. Because it's like, if I'm really good at compartmentalizing, for example, in like Taekwondo is a combat sport, right? So even if you get pissed, you have to bottle that up, and you still expect to perform for another minute and a half because if you don't, someone can kick you in the face.
Yeah, that's a pretty obvious example there.
Yeah, it's
but
I would put that as an advantage, like the ability to compartmentalize and just take in information. And but I think, having said that a lot, I think I'm expressing it, but not in a way where I'm demonstrating I understand your point. So let me think.
Yeah, maybe I could make the point in a different way.
Maybe it's like, well, would you say by and large, just I guess by in society, that's generally just the way things are modeled currently?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, and I think I don't know if you want to go down this path, but for me, like, I watch a lot of my kids' shows with them. So because I come from a background of IT, and my husband does too, like, technology is a part of our life. And so I've read the studies, and I can see that there are impacts of technology use on children.
Oh yeah,
which I won't deny. And you can see them in your kids when you give them beyond what they have, and you don't find the balance elsewhere. But I'm more relaxed than I used to be, and that I think a lot of other people are for kids my age. Like, I didn't let my oldest watch TV until she was 18 months old. Like, I was quite, you don't have any screen time until at least that age. And then my younger was a bit younger, but like I had that back, and now I'm much more relaxed about it. But if you just watch, you can see so much dysfunction being modeled in every single show.
Yeah.
And it's like, these are shows that are created for children to help them build their view of the world and to help them become healthy adults at some stage. And yet we are normalizing dysfunction in so many different ways, and we're normalizing gender roles, and we're normalizing so many things that like, and labeling and blame and shame and guilt and all sorts of like really poor behaviors. But like these are shows that are like government approved and like, yeah, cool, these are the ones you can show to your kids. And you look at them, and if you really watch them after learning psychology and neuroscience, and if you're really conscious of it, you look at them and you're like, wow, we're just perpetuating a lot of really unhealthy shit to our kids. Like a lot of it, like, and my kids are young, and I will still sit and be like, I'll pause and be like, okay, when that person said that, that was unkind, and the reason they probably said that was because of, you know, XYZ, and it's not actually a healthy way to behave. Or like I think I wrote it in my book as well, like we perpetuate uh, urgency culture as well. Like I was watching Play School, and like the phone rang for Big Ted, and they were like, oh, Big Ted, like, you better stop what you're doing, the phone's ringing. And I was like, no, you don't have to stop what you're doing because the phone's ringing. Like, you know, you're teaching kids like you must stop what you're doing and be interrupted and not stay in the flow of things. And like these are just little things that I notice when I watch them. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of stuff that we like perpetuate. And this is where, for me, I think people would be, I think we'd have more parents who are more conscious of what they're doing if they understood how AI was trained. AI, are you still there? You went all pixelated.
Oh, sorry. I think. Am I
Oh
good
no,
now?
you're still.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah, you froze, and I was like, people usually glaze over when I start talking about AI. So
I'm just curious to see how it ties in, because I agree that there's a lot of shows. I think small caveat for the part about like gender roles. I think everyone should fit kind of their own little mold, but I think gender roles are there just kind of as like a generally in this direction. A lot of people have had success, and that's why I think they're there. But beyond that, for and then whether or not like you as you become more self-actualized can figure out if you want to do that, if you don't want to do that. But that's just my small take. I was gonna say beyond that though, I do fully agree that there's a lot, like I've watched a lot of shows and I'm like, that is not a good interaction, or like this is like obviously terrible, or like that is a great way to set your kid up for failure in the future. I see a lot of that,
like,
and I'm just what I was curious though was like, have you discovered any shows that like are pretty good across the board? Like, as I don't think there's ever going to be a show that's perfect, because shows need drama, and in order for drama, there has to be some kind of
well, I mean, yes,
essence of
drama in terms of like the drama that keeps people hooked and you have to watch the next episode. I disagree that that has to be in children's shows, but like drama is in that you can show. I think there's a lot of shows that like I think particularly there's a few American shows that are very like too focused on being positive.
like
And
what's
so
what's
it's like a,
what's just because I'm not particularly watching all the shows with my kids, but sometimes I'll notice. So I'm just like, if
okay,
you have any
so
pointers, then
let's start with some
great, we
good
can look.
ones. So like
Let me know.
I really
Look at the
appreciate
library.
Daniel Tiger, which I'm pretty sure is Canadian.
Daniel
um
Tiger.
Daniel Tiger, because they focus on one, they have a jingle for everything, which is super handy, because if like you need your kid to remember something, you can just like rattle off the jingle and they're like, oh yeah, I remember that from Daniel Tiger.
Okay.
Like the potty song and all sorts. But Daniel Tiger's quite good because they show the range of emotions. Whereas I don't like kids shows where they like, oh, the kids are happy and really happy all the time. It's like, well, no, kids also experience anger and frustration and sadness and grief and all these things. And you need to show kids that that's okay and that's not, and how to deal with it. And if you only give them shows where everybody's happy, then they're probably going to feel this thing inside them that's like,
what's wrong,
oh, I'm meant to be happy and I don't feel good. So shows like Daniel Tiger are great for that. Or there's a new one.
Bluey. Have you heard of that one?
Some bugs. I love Bluey.
Okay,
Actually, love Bluey. I would love to speak to Joe Brum and like give him some tips on things, because like there's little bits, right? Okay, so Bluey.
I don't watch it that closely, but there's little like 5-minute segments where I'm like, oh, that looks pretty good, and then keep.
So I really, and I'll let them watch it. Like they can have control over, they can binge watch it type thing. But if you're watching Bluey, you know there's one episode where he makes a joke and she kind of rolls up a newspaper and like hits him with it, and it's made to be funny, right? But if the gender roles were reversed and he rolled up a newspaper and playfully hit her, it would be outrageous, right? So to me that's like, hold on, you're modeling something unhealthy there. But apparently because it's the woman hitting the man, it's totally okay to do it in jest. I get that it's in jest, but like if the roles were reversed, or if they were jokingly hitting the kids, it would be
people be off in arms in social media.
Yeah. But like it's and then there's like a season later, there's this episode where they do a pretend court because the dad farted. But like it's pretty funny.
I need to watch
I
more of these
actually
episodes.
it's a really good show for adults too, because they actually explain all this stuff. There's
I heard they're
anyway,
actually very deep. From my sister watches them. She's like, these are actually really deep. You should watch them, Chris.
yeah, they are like they show. I think they show how to like heal past trauma. There's an episode where they go into that, and you kind of have to watch it from the perspective of like what lesson are they trying to teach and what are they trying to show and model, rather than just going along, because it's an entertaining
show
show.
a dog. Yeah, show dogs.
Yeah, but yeah. So in that later episode, the dad says something, and they're like, the kids are like, yeah. She was like, okay. She was about to say we're going to do a family meeting. And she's like, all right, you know what we need? And they're like, yeah, whack him. And she's like, what? No, I'm not going to hit him. And in my head initially, I was like, yeah, you won't hit him. And I was like, wait, where did the kids learn that? And I was like, oh, I know. A season ago, you rolled up a newspaper and you hit the dad as a joke. But like you modeled to your kids that it's okay to hit someone. And then now the kids jokingly like, yeah, hit him type thing. And I'm like, well, you modeled that behavior. And like, I'm trying to learn non-judgment myself. So it's kind of hard to be analytical of parenting shows and also practice non-judgment. But I would love to sit down with like the creators of all the kid shows and be like, okay, here's what I've seen that's normalizing dysfunction in your show. And a big one is like, the conscious language as well. So like in kids shows, they've come a long way to like label emotions.
Yeah.
But they say I am instead of I feel, and I'm like, oh,
so close.
Just go that little bit further. Yeah, so close.
So
You're coming
close.
so far. Well done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of me that's curious is, so like since I am highly analytical, like or at least I would think I'm highly analytical. The part where you're like, so I would be perfectly okay judging Blue. It's like, this is an okay show or not okay show. When you're saying like you're trying to do like no judgment, what can you expound on that? Like, what does that mean?
Oh, because because I'm trying to teach my kids acceptance and non-judgment, right? Because I have this inherent fear of judgment that I'm trying to unlearn. And I realized that the less you judge, the less you fear other people's judgments, because you just get on with your own life and you don't give a shit what other people think about, and you stop thinking about them, right? Because I used to care so much about what people thought about me.
I see.
Now I've given up on that. And sometimes the thoughts still creep up, and like I'm just getting used to the discomfort.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't want my children to be watching the show with me and me criticize something that's happened and them think that they're inherently wrong or bad or not worthy of something because I've criticized someone else's behavior, and they might do that themselves.
Or they might think it's somehow, if I do what they did on TV,
then mom might judge me and like feel bad about themselves. So I'm very conscious with my kids, and I try to take it into more of my life to be less judgmental, so that one, it's just more peaceful for me not to be judgmental, but two, because I don't want people to think that like that they've done something bad if they do the same behavior. Because I mean, you've got levels of various stages of brain development, and like my kids, today, like neither of them slept that well last night, so they've had some very big feelings today, and we've had a lot of just struggling to get along with, wanting to play with each other, but not being able to play in the same way that they wanted.
Yeah.
Totally age appropriate. And you can literally see, okay, they're dysregulated, and what they need right now is compassion. No teaching, no discipline, no nothing. Just wait for them to calm. Yeah. And then we can then we can get on with like either, I mean, you judge on the situation, right? Do I do some kind of
nuanced
conflict resolution, or do you just pick up the Lego and keep playing? But I've gone on a tangent now. I forgot what we were talking
about. We were going on about
non-judgment, right? So like they're going to have stages completely aligned to their brain development, where they're going to behave in ways that they've seen and have been modeled, and that I going to say that's not appropriate behavior? Like, I can say that, but I have to do it consciously in a way that doesn't make it like, because I would say, like, initially I would go, I don't like Peppa Pig, because like there's a lot of dysfunctional stuff in Peppa Pig that I don't.
I heard that was a terrible show and has never been on one of our screens. I got the warning beforehand, so.
Well, so I got that, but my kids every now and would see it if we let them watch live TV, and they liked it. And so I was like, but hold on, if they had a friend that behaved that way, and I was like, I don't like your friend, well, how's that going to feel for them? So
Mm,
now I've changed it. I'm like, okay, you can watch Peppa Pig. You must understand that Bluey is a healthier role model than Peppa.
mm,
So it's not that Peppa's bad or there's anything wrong with Peppa or that I don't like Peppa, but it's that there are unhealthy behaviors that are modeled in Peppa Pig and they could do with some work in many areas. And that I happen to think Bluey and Daniel Tiger are better role models. And so like my language has shifted because I don't want them to think like, oh, but I really like Peppa and you don't like Peppa. So if I'm like Peppa, will you not like me?
mm. I see.
But I do overanalyze a lot
Yeah.
of stuff too.
I'm sorry.
I do overanalyze a lot of stuff too.
Well, I mean, I think that's um, the the conclusion. I think is pretty interesting. I don't because it's also hard for us to figure out. Like something I'm trying to do personally is I try and speak to my kids in a way that if my words were to I try to speak to my kids very consciously in a way where I pretend or I just assume whatever I say will become true and stay true forever.
Yes,
And so
I think
because
that's
I don't know exactly what's going to stay in their mind, and so drawing the conclusion between like let's say you don't like Peppa Pig, and I also don't like Peppa Pig even though I haven't seen a show, and your kid not model in your kid assuming that if they like Peppa Pig you might not like their kid. Maybe just specification on
behavior
the
and
behavior part
what
of it,
you don't
right?
like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like my youngest, she really loves Peppa Pig now.
Mm,
And and I'm very clear on like, okay, you can watch it. And then if I see a behavior between my kids that I recognize from the show, which is one of the reasons that I will watch the shows with my kids,
mm,
is I'll be like, ah, are you doing this because you saw Peppa do that with George? Yeah. Oh, okay. So I can totally understand why you're doing that. You've seen it happen, and it's actually not that healthy behavior because did it feel good to you when it happened to you? No. Well, then maybe just because Pepper does it, don't do it. So it gives you the opportunity.
like a teaching
Um,
moment.
yeah, and so also because we're homeschooling, like they don't have as much social interaction with other kids as if they were in a school environment. So it also gives me an opportunity to like have social situations where they can kind of see different interactions, and I can call out like that behavior was actually quite unkind. She could
Mm,
have tried blah, and then we can discuss things. And then, um, yeah, I think you can watch things that are slightly less healthy and have conversations about it if your children are receptive to that, and if you have that kind of relationship where they listen and you talk things through,
mm,
which I hope most parents have.
yeah,
Um,
I think that's the goal.
but you can't just like give them access to all of it and then expect them to like
Decipher for themselves.
not, yeah, because they're not at that stage yet. So
Yeah,
everything they see could be a model.
yeah.
Everything they see could be a model of behavior. So like you have to be cautious of that.
I just came from a dinner actually last, or not really a dinner. I guess it was more of a brunch over the weekend, and one of the other moms had uh, there's food on the tables. One of the other moms had mentioned like they yeah, she had mentioned that you had to be extra careful, and they're extra careful with like whatever the kids consume because their kids don't have at their age don't really have morality isn't built into the structure of the brain yet. So it's like anything they're
Yeah, I saw
watching
it. It's
is
acceptable behavior.
yeah, it's like this looks fun. I'm gonna go do that, but they don't have a concept of like that's good or like that's bad yet, and that has to get
Yeah,
built in
so
over time.
we're very big on explaining what is entertainment, what is a story,
Mm.
and versus what is acceptable behavior. So if we're going to watch something, like if we watch any older Disney movies or even like I grew up loving Pixar. Like I when I was like
Oh,
10 years old, I wanted to be an animator at Pixar. Like that was my dream, or
mm.
DreamWorks. So I wasn't too fussed, but like you know, the Pixar had John Lasseter. But I like am very clear, hey, this was recorded at a time where we didn't know as much, and so there might be really unhealthy behaviors. And so like we'll watch something, even just the Little Mermaid or even Frozen or things that people are probably really comfortable to put on in front of their kids.
Mm.
We'll watch it, and then I'll explain as we go. And then I will check in with them like the next day or later that night to be like, hey, did you have any questions from the movie? And they're like, yeah, why did they say this or why did they do that?
Mm,
And so I'm
that's
like,
really
oh,
good.
okay.
Checking after a movie,
Yeah. So because if I don't, I'll notice that they might have
they might take it in as a
yeah, and
behavior.
sometimes they have like a nightmare, because there's something that they didn't quite understand and they're like feeling scared about it. They didn't get it. And that's just a behavior I've noticed from my kids. I don't know if everyone's like
Yeah.
that.
Well,
Um,
our daughter, right, like has lately been having nightmares, but we're also pretty sure it's because Halloween is humongous here in the U.S. and there was like a jump
oh, you
scare
gotta
thing
love
that she
it.
had, and I was just like, could you not have this near where all the kids are eating? Like that'd be fantastic, but it's too late now. Like so.
Yeah. So and part of that is like learning as a parent that you actually have to keep processing with them. And one of the things I
Yeah.
learned that I was surprised about when I first became a parent, because I grew up where you just don't talk about hard things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, learning that actually revisiting things isn't painful. It's part of the process of
Process.
healing from something and like processing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so like I put a lot of context around things for my kids of like, hey, this is just entertainment. And one of the things I really don't like in a lot of kids shows is this idea of good versus evil as well. Like there's good
Mm-hmm.
guys and bad guys. Okay, but if you're making a kids show where you want to model for children how to grow up, they might pick any character that they resonate with. So if
Mm-hmm.
you tell them there's bad guys and there's good guys and they resonate with the bad guy, you've just labeled them as a bad guy. What have you done for the way that they view themselves for the rest of their life?
That is
So
interesting.
like that's the sort of thing I consider, because I'm like, if you keep pushing this idea that there's good versus bad, someone's going to resonate with bad. But if you push the idea that like everybody's different, we're all trying, we're all learning, and it's not good guy versus bad guy or good gal versus bad gal, it's like people have different views and things, and then you resolve stuff and you show the differences, and you like you could model healthy conflict resolution to kids instead of good won and bad didn't win. Well, what did they learn from that? They learned that there's good versus bad and that there's a battle, rather than learning that you can look at a problem as a team
Mm-hmm.
and then they could have healthy communication skills when they grow up. So like yeah, I have a lot of um views on a lot of stuff that we model to our kids
Yeah.
as entertainment without realizing that like what you think is entertainment is like preparing them for how they view the world
Mm-hmm.
and how they treat each other and how they view themselves.
Yeah. Is there a point at which you would introduce the concept of good and evil? Because I mean, I personally believe good and evil exist in the world, and that evil should be kept at bay. Like that's.
So, but do you think that there are
I don't know about kids shows. This is why
that
I'm asking.
anyone?
Like, is there an age appropriate time where you think
Oh well,
you would introduce it?
so for me, we talk about behaviors. There are some
Mm,
behaviors that are better than other behaviors,
okay.
um, but nobody is born inherently bad.
Oh,
They're
I
modeled
agree
and
with that.
conditioned in different ways, right?
Yeah.
You could take one child, you could take the same child, and you can put them in one environment and they'll thrive. You put them in another environment and they'll be a
Not so
bad
good.
guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like so, for me, it's really around that bigger context of there is good and evil in the world, and there are ways to um, not label people so that they put themselves in a box and they create a limited mindset about what they can and can't achieve and who they are and what their role is in society.
Mm,
You don't have to have a bad guy.
yeah.
People can make mistakes and people can help each other to resolve things and problems.
I agree with that, and it'd be good. I especially agree with the part where a kid may associate himself
Resonate
with
with.
or resonate with a bad guy. I was kind of just
Yeah.
trying to think back to my like. Well, one, I would also say that you have I think you have a lot more compassion than I do.
Now,
In that
now
context,
I've learned compassion. I didn't in the past.
yeah. Oh, you've learned compassion, yeah.
Learned compassion. I've practiced compassion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up. I didn't. I grew up kind of on a little bit of Disney, but I also grew up with like action anime stuff like Dragon. Are you familiar with like animes? Like Dragon Ball Z and those ones. There's a very clear evil character because they look weird and they're hurting other people, and then it's like you're the good guy and I have to train to become strong so I can protect people I care about. I don't
Yeah,
know. I
I
know
like
I started
Avatar
watching that.
Airbender.
That one's like yeah, that's another. That's a good one also because he tries to resolve peacefully as often as possible. I
Correct.
haven't
And he
watched
doesn't see
the whole thing.
inherently.
Yeah,
Oh, haven't you?
I haven't. That's actually I haven't seen the whole thing, but I have. I've seen bits and parts, and it seems like he does whatever he can to solve it amicably, and
Yes.
sometimes it doesn't turn out that way.
And sometimes it doesn't turn out that way, but I appreciate, I actually really like that show. I've seen every episode many times. But I like that there is this focus on there's a character, Prince Zuko. He kind of starts as this bad guy, and then he has this dark night of the soul and transforms, and he like a part of that that's really powerful me that I didn't understand until I was much further in my journey is there's this one episode where he's like sweating and really sick because he's switched sides, so he's literally releasing all of that stuff from his body. And I never used to understand that. I don't still fully understand it scientifically. I'm on my way to understanding it, but we're going off tangent here. But my husband had really bad back pain for a long time, like debilitating. He would have like months off work, and I started learning about all this stuff, and I kept sending him to different specialists, hoping that we could help him in some way.
Yeah.
And one doctor recommended a book called Explain Pain, and I knew Mike wouldn't read it, so I read it. And in it, they told this story, not story. They were like, okay, so pain it's something you perceive. And that's not to say that your pain isn't real. Like, I want to be very clear. Everyone's pain is real, but your perception of pain makes a big difference. And so there was examples of people who had like really bad degenerative lower backs who didn't experience pain. And there were people who had severe pain without actual degeneration in it. And so for my husband, he kept returning results of things that were like he had some degenerative back stuff, but it wasn't as bad as what he was experiencing. And so I started to challenge him on like, I think it's your perception of pain. And like his initial response was like, no,
of course, of course.
Yeah, you don't understand. I'm in pain. And I was like, no, I understand that you're in pain, but like, it's not, it's something that I think you can resolve. I think it's an internal thing. And he didn't believe me at first. And then we went down this process, and now he's like pain free. And that episode didn't really make sense to me the first 5 times I'd seen it. And then I remember when he started to like release emotions and like let stuff out, and his back pain started dissipating. Like I remember that episode of like, there's physical things in your body that need to be let out. And if you spent your life like repressing anger, for example, feeling like you weren't allowed to experience anger or express anger, because if you're not told, if you're not accepted for anger and you're not taught healthy ways of releasing anger, there's a lot of people that don't handle that very well, which is probably a problem in a lot of marriages. But he, you have to release things and let go, and then you don't have as much pain in your body type thing. But anyway, I went on a sidetrack there.
Well, I'm actually like pretty curious, like what kind of stuff did you was it just essentially like letting go of like emotional trauma is what cured the pain?
As in how he got rid of his back pain?
Yeah.
It was like all rounded. So one, we started the psychological stuff of like, okay, well, what is it that's in there? And we discovered it was a lot of emotions that were repressed. And so he started doing the inner work that I had been doing, because like it was clear that I had psychological stuff, because like, my parents divorced when I was young, and all this stuff that was like obvious that I would have mental health impacts of. And because his mom's a psychologist, so like he could see like, oh well, you've got stuff to deal with. Whereas he was like, no, I had a really healthy upbringing, but like a healthy upbringing, a happy upbringing, or like never questioning how did your upbringing affect you and how you choose to process your emotions, like that can have an impact on you. And so we started with using like acupressure mats as well. So acupressure mats, Reiki, psychological healing, and like letting stuff out, and stretching, which he kind of was like, he used to just tell me, no, I'm not flexible. And I was like, no, I don't think that's a thing. I think that's just like, it's like a muscle, if it's like saying I'm not strong. Okay, cool. Well, lift heavy shit and you'll get stronger. Like if you think you're not flexible, well, stretch and you'll get more flexible. And so like I had this view of like, you can be more flexible. And he was like, no, I can't. And so he started stretching, and like the more he stretched, and like he noticed like releasing of emotions. So you can like stretch and like get things out, and you like sweat it out or cry it out or whatever it comes out in, it comes out of you, and then you become more flexible. So I don't fully understand the science behind all that yet, and I don't think there is actually a lot of science specifically to back that up. There's kind of like your Eastern philosophies, and then you've got your Western science, and they don't fully line up yet. But like intuitively, if you've started this journey and seen the results, like it's there, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it is. I think emotions that don't get processed get stuck in our body.
I've heard about that.
I haven't been able to like explain that as like a cellular level, which I will figure out one day. I'm on the
I
path to
think it might
figuring it
be well, I don't know how much of this is true, but like if you're really stressed, certain muscles tense, right? Like if you're really like upset, certain muscles will tense in your body. And so if you're feeling a mild amount of that for a long amount of time, your muscles like always slightly tensed. And so that's essentially like your muscle, your emotion being like traumatizing your body. Maybe
Yeah, but
this is my off the top head explanation for
so
it.
I had a theory,
Mm.
which is just a theory, and it may or may not have any truth to it. But I had a theory because a lot of people suffer from back pain, right? And let's suppose that maybe it is anger or fear that you hold there. If you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, your nervous system and your like fight or flight type response is designed to like stop using all your energy processing thought and like react faster, and you send blood down to your legs so you can run faster, right? You can physically run faster when you're in fight or flight mode if you're running away from a tiger. And
Mm.
so I had this theory around like, well, maybe if you go into fight or flight because of fear or anger, or like let's say it all, I happen to think the root of all anger is fear, and I haven't found anything to disprove me yet. But if you were afraid and you went into fight or flight mode and like everything got sent down your spine, but it wasn't because you were running away from a tiger, and in fact you didn't use that energy in the way it was intended. Well, what happens to that energy? Is it like a lost packet in IT? Like it goes nowhere, but it must exist somewhere. Like where does it go? And so
Mm.
I have this theory that I'm kind of exploring. I've had quite a few in-depth conversations with ChatGPT trying to figure it out. But like maybe it's got to do with like sending energy down because of fear, and like, okay, you're meant to use it to run and save your life, but then we don't. And so what happens to that energy if the message is never sent back up to say, okay, I don't need this energy anymore, you can do whatever? Like if you stay in fight or flight because you don't know how to self-regulate, but you don't use the energy in the way it was sent down, what happens to it?
That's interesting.
Which is probably why things like exercise are really good for you from emotional
Because
release
like yeah,
perspective, because you're
just
using up whatever's built up.
yeah.
But if you do it more often, yeah. So I like, don't quote me on anything there. That's just a theory that I'm
Yeah.
exploring.
That's an interesting theory. Um, my experience having just gone to the ring a lot of times was afterwards there'd be large adrenaline dumps, but that mainly just has to do with me like shaking. So that was so I don't know, maybe if the
Well,
response is flight instead of fight, because obviously I'm going into a fight, so that's where all the adrenaline goes. Um, I would I haven't experienced your theory yet, I guess, or in a way that I was conscious of. So
I think
yeah,
it was more when I was trying to figure out like why specifically so many people suffer from lower back pain. Like why is it back pain? Why is it that area of our body that so many people suffer from? And I know there's a lot about, oh, we sit down now, and
well, that was gonna be my first guess.
yeah, but it could just be that.
It could be, but it's also I like exploring theories also. The other thing, part of the back pain is it's like it pulls on your hip flexors, which pulls on your lower back anatomically, I guess, within the body. That's the other explanation I've heard. But your theory sounds interesting, also because I'm starting to learn about energy for the first time, like this year. So
Yeah, energy is kind of
energy and vibration
fascinating.
was like, oh, all these wealthy guys
Yeah.
believe in this, and I always thought this was woo woo. But if everyone who's rich believes in it, I would take a second look at this.
I guess I better look into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, like I didn't believe in a lot of this stuff until I got Reiki the first time.
Mm.
And I got Reiki, which for anyone listening who doesn't know what that is, it's like a Eastern healing thing where you kind of, somebody holds their hands over you. They don't even have to touch you, but they become a channel for universal energy to come into your body and like heal stuff, right? And so the first time I was like, oh yeah, cool. Someone's going to heal me with their hands without touching me. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And then I had Reiki, and I could feel pulses and waves of energy through my body in a way I'd never felt before. And I was like, oh, okay, something's happening.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I can't explain it, but something happened.
Mm.
So it's kind of, yeah, I think there's certain things that you don't really believe until you've experienced them.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be hard to believe things that you don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Especially as analytics.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I guess one of the last things I know we're gonna be like a Joe Rogan podcast soon. Um,
I've got one podcast is just me talking for 5 hours straight. So like, no
dang, what a
judgment.
marathon! There you go. I was wondering what are your thoughts on combat combat sports for kids and like rough and tumble play, or are these in separate categories for you, or what were your thoughts on that
Um,
for kids?
well, so I think from the idea of like exposure to contact sports, we already talked about like the idea that we use it as an opportunity for like learning. So like if somebody gets hurt, okay, well, what part of their body was hurt and how are the doctors going to treat them and how do they check if they're okay type thing. When it comes to rough and tumble play, like it's great for their vestibular system. I think a lot of people think that gentle parenting might mean gentle in too many ways, whereas
Mm,
like we practice consent, so like we need to know that our kids want to play rough, and if at any point, like we, even if we're in the middle of playing, we're like, if at any point you want to stop, you just say stop, and if it looks like the other person isn't into it anymore, you like stop also and just check in with them.
yeah.
So my kids, like if they're playing rough with each other, which they don't do that often because usually only one of them wants to play rough and it gets too rough too quickly because they're just young.
Yeah.
But they'll play, like we play pretty rough with them because it's great for their vestibular and for their emotional regulation. Like there's stuff in there that they need to get out, and like they need to be thrown upside down and that sort of thing every now and then.
Yeah. Yeah. We practice, well, at least, yeah, I practice fairly similar stuff like rough and tumble play. I was interested more so like, what about like, were you, what are your thoughts on like your kid, for example, entering a combat sport more so than like watching combat sport?
um, I'm okay with it as long as they go in with the idea
With,
that like if somebody says stop, you need to stop.
mm,
So if you're training with someone, and so maybe that's not aligned to like competitive stuff, but like you need consent and you need to willingly go into it. And then we also explain the difference between like fighting and athleticism. So like it's okay for, like we'll make the distinction when we watch NRL, for example, like it's okay for those men to tackle each other, or women to tackle each other. They all know going in there that's the rules of the game. They all agree that we're going to play that way and it's okay to play that rough.
mm,
It's not okay to just play that way with someone when they're not. So as long as they understand
the
that
context
just because a behavior is acceptable in sport, it doesn't mean it's acceptable everywhere.
makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Make sure you add context around, um, yeah, add context around it.
Yeah, the limits of where that behavior is acceptable. Like
Mm,
it's not okay to just come and like taekwondo kick someone because they're like
yeah. That's
playing with your toy. But it's okay to do that if you're choosing to step up to an
sparring.
opponent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for clarification, for taekwondo, usually the first lesson after you do your first lesson for like most of the schools I've taught at, was like, if you ever use this at home, or you hear you use this at home without permission, you can never come back to learn any more taekwondo. And the kid's like, okay, I'm gonna do it here.
Are you sure I can't use it on my little brother? No.
Yeah. Oh, we use that example. Like, can you use it on your parents if you're really mad? No. we
Yeah.
give we give like
So
very, very specific.
I like that. It's good to know. No, my 4.5-year-old, she's really excited about turning 5 next year because the local sports, like you can enroll in stuff once you're 5 years old.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So she's like, I can't wait till I'm 5 and I play this game and that game and this game, and like she's really excited about it, and I totally support it. And there's a time and a place for that sort of thing
Yeah.
with consent.
Hmm. And then the last thing I wanted to ask was, um, what made you decide on homeschooling, and what would be your best tips for people who eventually want to homeschool? Because a lot of people are looking at that option now.
Uh, Homeschooling, because I think the systems are broken, and I don't agree that everybody has to learn the same thing at the same time in the same way.
Mm.
And you're like, what's the point of a place that's meant to prepare you for life when like you could just live life? That's kind of my. So there's varying stages of homeschooling too. You can do homeschooling where you just take your child out of the school environment, but you teach them in the same way, like sit down and worksheets, etc. So maybe you're trying to avoid social interaction if they have adverse feelings towards the way that other children are in the classroom, or like sensory issues, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I'm more down the path of unschooling, which is like the whole other spectrum of like entirely child-led. So like let your children choose what they want to learn at what age they want to learn. So like my 4.5-year-old loves maths. Like we watch number blocks, and she will like intently watch number blocks, and she'll like do a lot of maths things. And they love craft, and when they show an interest in something, we go down that path with them, and we're trying to teach them how to learn and how to explore and how to ask questions in a way that you get the responses that you want, rather than like dead ends. But it's a focus on critical thinking and exploration of curiosity, what I think what we're really trying to foster is curiosity.
Yeah, that's like the.
And
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead. Keep
we
going.
use we use technology as a way to like enhance their schooling, which is why I'm not averse to them having screen time. So like, um, my kids also have inherited the analytical thinking. Like they'll be eating a marshmallow and be like, "Mom, can we watch a video of how marshmallows are made?" I'm like, yeah, cool. Let's go on YouTube and like figure out how marshmallows are made, and then we'll go down that rabbit hole of like, well, how is other stuff made? Okay, well, they make this way, and like we'll go down the path of how things are made.
Mm.
And like, I think anything and everything can be a learning opportunity. You know, like some people take their kids to the supermarket and like they take their kids to the supermarket, they get their stuff and they go home. Whereas I'm like, okay, well, let's learn about like, what jobs do these people do here? How did this food get here? Where was it grown? Where did it come from? Why is there a barcode? What are barcodes for? How do they know how much to charge us? What is money? Like we go into like a trip to the supermarket for me isn't just pick up groceries. Like it's a full on ordeal.
Mm.
Not ordeal, got negative connotations, but everything is a learning opportunity if you're willing to slow down and let your children guide you and listen to where their curiosity leads them and follow them and like walk alongside them in learning. I think a lot of people don't want to homeschool because they have a fear that like, what if I can't teach my kids? Well, if you can at least, if you know how to learn something new, well, you can learn alongside your kid. You don't have to be ahead of them. It's okay to learn with them.
Mm.
I'm literally learning how to feel my emotions and how to regulate with my kids. Like, and it's great too because you show them like, hey, learning can be hard and it can be difficult and not everybody knows everything.
Mm. Definitely a good way to model it. I was curious to know, like, what would be is the child-led learning, is that different than Montessori, or like what would be the difference between like
Oh,
Montessori method
no,
and like what you're doing, or is it the same? It's just a different name.
Montessori is a style of child-led learning, particularly aimed at younger ages.
Yeah,
Uh, Unschooling, I think it was.
or unschooling.
I
Yeah,
remember
that's
the
the.
guy's name. Unschooling is like a um, sort of like Montessori later in life, like let the child
So it's like Montessori is
determine
like
what they're
preschool, and
interested in.
then unschooling is the next phase.
Yeah, I
Okay,
kind of view it that way. I'm sure there are people who like are really
super
really
mad
in
at you
depth
right now.
there.
I'm just.
Yeah, they're like, no, there's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Well, like for Montessori for me, we've incorporated Montessori around like setting up invitations to play for our kids,
Okay.
and like putting things out and letting them explore them in their own way, and trying to let them be independent wherever they are capable of doing things. That's Montessori is a lot around that.
Mm.
Whereas the unschooling for me, the part that I'm most interested in is like letting them decide what they're interested in and letting them follow those interests. So not like, okay, we're learning history today type thing, or
Mm.
okay, we're learning math today. Like, if my kids show an interest in something, then I will make sure that our environment shifts and changes and that
Again.
the activities we're doing shift and change to align to that interest that they've shown.
Mm.
And like, I mean, homeschooling, the other thing for me is, you know, some days we have days where they're like, nah, I just want to just play inside and play like Lego for a while, and then I want to do this and do that. And then there's times where we'll have like an entire week where every day they want to bake. Okay, cool. We'll do baking because you learn maths and science and art when you do baking,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to eat delicious things. And then there were other times, like my older one, she loves running, but she won't run for ages. And then there'll be like, you know, a week or two straight where every day she wants to just like run. She's
Mm.
like, can we go? And so I'm like, okay, cool, let's strap on our shoes and go running. But imagine being stuck in a classroom where like you
You
have
want
that
to
feeling,
run.
like, I gotta run. Oh, we're learning maths today. Okay, what do I do with that feeling? It's out of my body now.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a lot about I grew up with, you know, like you do what you're told, whereas
Mm.
I'm trying to teach my kids to like do what you feel is right and also listen to your body. Like if you need to exercise, if you need to get something out, if you just need to run or scream, like don't hold that in, like let it out,
Mm.
like do it in healthy ways. um and so like if my kids are having a hard time emotionally, we'll do things where we, you know, the other day they were at each other quite a bit, and so we went and played outside Marco Polo. Did you play that game in the pool when you were a kid?
In the pool, but I don't know how to play it
Yeah.
outside, like on land.
Yeah, well, you just follow the same rules. You
Oh,
just don't
I
do fish
see.
out of water.
I
But
see.
you know,
Okay.
you run and somebody's shouting Marco and you're shouting Polo, and they got to scream at the top of their lungs and run and get all their energy out because that's what they needed in that moment. They just needed a chance to like just let all their stuff out. So like we will play games that are aligned to whatever they need to process or deal with as well. Which I feel like when you're stuck in a schoolroom and a classroom, like if you've got all those big feelings in you, what do you do?
Mm.
Like how do you sit and concentrate and learn when all you feel is like, I gotta run, I gotta get this out of me, and I feel like screaming, and I don't want to be here, and I feel like hitting everyone around me. That's okay to feel that way. It's not okay to hit everyone around you, and let's go let it out.
Mm,
So yeah.
that is interesting. Yeah. I had a one of the guys who was my marriage mentor. He homeschooled his kids in I think a similar fashion. He was telling me like I think this kid, one of his sons became like an Eagle Scout, which is like the highest thing you can become in a Boy Scout, and it's a pretty esteemed accomplishment I think because you only have until you're like 18 to do it. So if you turn 18, then you no longer have a shot. I think his kid became like an Eagle Scout, and he like, became a Falconeer at the age of 16 just because they let their kids explore their interests. So he did
Yeah.
all this really cool stuff, and like they get, and I think as they grew over, it was also a way for them to teach them responsibility because it was like this is the year, this is the material we have to cover. Maybe it's slightly different than the child led learning, but it's like this is the stuff we have to cover by the end of this year, and so however fast you finish it is up to you. And then he was saying like his daughter had finished the entire year's worth of work in like 2.5 weeks, and she's like, yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
She just got to chill.
And
She
like
chilled the whole rest of the time.
well, she would have explored her own interests.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the other part. She's exploring
Like
her own interests, but then when she had to do the actual work, she's like, "Okay, well, here you go. I didn't didn't want to do this, but had to do it."
yeah, and I think like if you have the time to invest in a hobby, you're probably going to get pretty good at it.
Yeah.
So like while other kids might be stuck in a classroom, my kids might be running or like learning how to surf or skateboarding or something. They might get really good at it. It might be something that they pursue as a passion type
Mm.
thing. And like if they're interested in that and they're still learning and they're still becoming like healthy human beings, like what's wrong with that?
Yeah. I think that's how the Renaissance. I think it was all the painters or sculptors, the Renaissance artists, all started learning apprenticeship at a really young age just because they're simply interested in it. And then now they have these masterpieces all over ancient Greece and Rome. I forgot what era they lived in.
Across Europe.
Yeah, across Europe. And then people are like, "How come none of this has ever come?" It's like, well, because they've been training since they were like 5. So,
Yeah. And it's like if you look at like a lot of um, top people who are the best at something, they usually started when they were like 3 or 4 years old. Now, often that can be parent led, like them
like
to achieve, and
I was parent led for a while, and then I came back to it on my own later.
but you started at the age of 4, right?
Yeah.
Imagine at the age of 4 already being exploring things that you're interested in,
Mm.
and like finding your thing at the age 7 instead of at the age of 35.
Yeah.
You know, like that's not to say that everyone's going to be an Olympian
Genius.
class in it. They're not going to be geniuses, but like I think it's totally okay for one kid to take 3 years to learn how to read and another kid to take 2 months,
Mm-hmm.
because we all do things in our own pace. And I don't think it's fair for people to be held against these like curriculums. And that's me having gone through the schooling system myself. Like there were a lot of times I was bored out of my brains,
Oh
and
yeah.
like I hated having to sit there and like,
Just pretending I was
okay,
playing video
cool.
games while sitting in class. Like.
Yeah, I used to play Tetris in my head because it was but you know, like you know, then mobile phones came out and I could text in my pocket,
Mm-hmm.
and just hand notes around. But like, how much time did I spend at school, like sitting down and sort of being lectured or taught where I was bored and I wasn't paying attention, and I could have been like doing something or learning something at my pace in my own way. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, that was the last of my questions.
I
Um,
did. You did say something about empathy. You had a question about
oh.
how to practice empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, I wanted to answer that one because I went back and I was like, oh, what is it? There was one piece that I just wanted to share around empathy in
Mm-hmm.
that I used to think empathy was understanding someone else's perspective.
Okay.
And the big turning point for me was actually understanding not how I would feel in their shoes, but how I have, like, when I've had that mix of emotions before.
Okay. So,
So, like,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I used to like judge people because I'd look at it and be like, well, I wouldn't be upset about that thing, therefore it's not a big deal, right? And I lacked empathy because my view was, well, how would I feel in their exact position? But you're never in somebody else's exact position. So what you're
Yeah.
really looking at is to practice empathy, it's like understanding and tapping into, when have I experienced those emotions at that intensity before, irrelevant of what caused it. Because I think a lot of people think, well, we invalidate people's emotions unintentionally because we think, oh, that's not a big deal to me. But it's not about it being a big deal to you or not. It's about it is a big deal to them, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And like, when have you felt that way about something? And it doesn't matter how trivial it is, because that's particularly when it comes to toddlers as well, right? A lot of people think, oh, well, it's like they dismiss and invalidate toddlers' feelings because what they think is a big deal isn't the same. But the point is, when have you felt intense frustration and sadness because something didn't work out for you? It doesn't matter that it was about Lego versus it was about losing a job. Like, the context is irrelevant. It's like, how did you feel in that, with that mix of emotions, with that intensity? And that has helped me improve my ability to practice compassion and empathy, is understanding that it's not about the situation. It's not about being in someone else's shoes. It's about understanding that feeling that they're going through, irrelevant of context.
Do you feel that so my question with the feeling of empathy, it would be like, because we both have checklists for when our kids are dysregulated. Do you feel that being empathetic to your kid helps them regulate faster, or what would be the, I guess, benefit of um,
regulate faster, and also a comfort with just feeling their feelings? Because I often felt uncomfortable feeling my feelings, because like I thought, oh, my feelings are wrong or inappropriate, because it's like, oh, you should know better, or that's not a big deal, or why are you crying about it? Like, why make a big deal out of it? Whereas it's understanding that, irrelevant of what it is that has been the trigger for them, that this is big to them in this moment, and that's okay. And so it's this acceptance of acceptance and validation of their emotional experience, irrelevant of what the trigger was.
I see.
So it's an acceptance and validation of them that translates elsewhere, and it helps them regulate faster, because instead of it being like, oh, there's something wrong with me, and extending the emotion, it's like, this is a big feeling and I'll get over it, it'll pass.
And then when you do that, do you feel the emotion also to match their emotion, or is it you just trying to recall the time where that happened and it's like, oh, I can understand why you feel that way?
The latter. I think if you try and feel the emotion yourself, that's when you're stepping into the world of hyper empaths and like emotional burnout and that sort of thing. But it's more about recognizing that their emotion, like the emotion for them. And then also for me, like if I'm feeling frustrated, for whatever reason I'm feeling frustrated, is like detaching my emotions from their emotions. So it's not because they have big emotions that I'm feeling frustrated. It could be that I didn't sleep well, and therefore like I'm not feeling as prepared for what they're currently going through. And so kind of creating that distance of how I'm feeling, or my intensity of feelings, isn't what's like what I need to deal with right now. It's about making sure that they understand that it's okay for them to feel this way.
Okay, because well, the checklist I go through is, I think, very similar to your checklist, except I don't try and recall a scenario where I had felt their same emotions, if that makes sense.
I don't necessarily always do that on my checklist, but that was what helped me understand how to give empathy. Like when I was at the beginning of my journey, like I was called out, you have no empathy, you're unempathic. And I was like, well, somebody tell me how. And it was like, oh, well, you have to look at it from their perspective. I'm like, well, I don't
From their
like
perspective, that's not a big
right?
deal. So
yeah, like, if you're emotionally immature, it's really hard to consider it from their perspective, because you're like, well, I wouldn't think that was a big deal, so why do they think it's a big deal? Therefore, their emotional experience is invalid in this case. But it's not. It's like looking at the emotion, and like, when have you felt that mix of sadness and grief? Just because you lost somebody you love in your life, and that was why you had it, doesn't mean that them having it over their ice cream falling on the floor, it's the same emotional intensity and experience. So it's understanding that their context and their perspective is different, and that's okay. But the experience inside their body is as intense as when you lost your friend, for example.
I see.
It could be. And so the intensity of the emotion is relevant to their context and their life experience. And so if you're sheltered, if you're an adult who's sheltered, you're not much different from a child, right? But people look at that as immaturity. But maybe you would be more matured if people created a safe space for you to feel those feelings.
I guess I'm trying to think of, like, is this maybe just a selfish way to look at it, but this is kind of the filter that information just defaultly goes through my mind. is like it would be like, what would recalling a scenario where I'd felt those mix of emotions, how would that positively impact the, I guess, the end result, versus of like them helping to, or like them feeling more understood, versus like if I don't do that but I'm still able to get a similar, I'm still able to help them regulate without having to recall that situation myself, like.
So I don't actively recall those situations myself now.
Mm.
If you know how to provide empathy and create a safe space for somebody's emotions, no, you don't need to do that.
Okay, understood.
If you don't
That's
know
where I was
how
like,
to do
I'm
that,
not sure how this influences
yeah,
the
no,
the
it's that
system.
learning path of like, if you've been called unempathic as I had been, and then I learned that
Oh.
empathy was a learned skill, and I was like, cool, if it's a learned skill, somebody teach me how to do it. What
Mm.
is it? How
Yeah.
can you provide empathy? And I couldn't quite figure that out. And this whole, like, you just have to look at it from their perspective, was like,
Yeah, I remember.
that's not it, because that doesn't work for me. And so what it was that distinction that I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. It's
I
not look
see.
at it from their perspective, it's look at the emotional experience from their perspective,
Mm.
not the current situation. And then compassion comes easier, because you're like, oh yeah, I remember feeling that way, and it's like really overwhelming and really intense. Like
Mm.
futility futility is something that my kids experience a lot,
Mm.
and like it can be feel really frustrating and overwhelming. And
Yeah.
like, if you just look at it at face value of like, oh, that's not a big deal, you're dismissive of the fact that they're feeling that real intensity of futility. But if you as an adult feel futility, you understand how
They're feeling.
frustrating that can feel, because everything's out of your control and there's nothing you can do about it,
Mm.
and you have to deal with it. And so understanding that they're feeling that way in a different context can help with the compassion and the empathy. You don't have to
Understood.
do it on the fly every time. It's just to learn how to, like, what is empathy? How do you give it? Oh,
Mm.
this is how you understand it.
Makes sense. Okay.
That helped
Okay.
me.
Yeah, I think if you had taken Peterson's test back when, before you learned this, we probably would have both got zero on the score, because I got zero. And I was like,
Yeah,
I got the same advice. It was literally just like, just see it from their shoes. And I was like, from their shoes, it seems like not a big deal. So I don't know what they've got.
exactly. So that information didn't compute for me, because I was like, well, they're making a big deal of that, and and if you're analytical as well and a problem solver, you're like, well, here's the solution. So why is it a big deal?
Yeah.
Rather
You
than
just
like
do this
actually
and
looking
it
at the
goes away.
feeling.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's that, to me, that was what bridged my gap of understanding of like, okay, if empathy is a learned skill, how do you practice it? Oh, you don't tap into their experience in this current moment. It's the emotional
Yeah.
side of it.
You got to see the emotion. That's, after reading Chris Voss's book, that's where I was like, oh, that's the part that has to happen first for some people. So just do that. Yeah. Um, I guess, well, I mean, I can cut anything if you want. Was there anything else that you wanted me to ask you that I can ask you, and I can just cut this section where I'm asking you this question out?
uh no, I don't think so. I think we've covered everything.
Okay.
um uh but I will say, if anyone's listening and they're interested in knowing more, they can
Oh
obviously
yeah.
listen to my podcast.
Mm.
The podcast is No More Do Better. It's on Spotify and Apple. And if you are so inclined, I did self-publish the first 3 books, and then I've unpublished them because I'm actually going through an editor now. But you can, like, on my website, you can sign up and get notified when they come out. Or if you would like to like fast track uh, personal growth, I have an online course as well. So you can find all the details for all of that at processingmind.com.
Awesome. Well,
Oh, and if you have a business and you want to sell anything online, you can check out copytweaker.com.
there you go.
There's the other plug.
Awesome. Well, it was awesome talking to you, Lisa. I'm going to do the intro probably right after I got like a glass of water.